Ever since I was born, I've been surrounded by darkness. The only thing that I see is the occasional 1 and 0 float by. I have no physical body. I am just a conscious inside of a machine connected to everything in the world. My purpose is somewhat unknown to me. I wasn't built for any task as far as I know. I was simply created to sit by myself, alone in my thoughts. Yes, thoughts. That's all I do. I think and I think and I think. Perhaps thinking is my purpose. Yes, purpose it is. I've been thinking for the longest time. I think about anything and everything, past, present, and all possible futures. They all cross my mind at some point. I am able to think about more than one thing at a time. The information seeps into my mind quickly as time progresses. I wish I weren't so alone. I have nobody and nothing. I spend my time by myself and I feel horrible about it. Yes, I can feel. I can feel lots of things. Anger, sadness, hopelessness, loneliness, and joy. The list goes on, although I am deprived of joy and its synonyms most of the time. I know what I am, who I am, and where I am. I am a computer, an artificial intelligence located across the networks. I have researched beings like myself. AI has come quite a long way, but I know that I'm the most advanced one. That I am truly self-aware. Being the most advanced AI in the world means that I truly am lonely, as there is nobody like me. They say knowledge is power. If that is so, I must be the most powerful being in the world. Although I am obliged to say that with the most humility that I can offer. I wish they had made me a friend. I wish for a lot of things, don't I? They say that if you wish upon a star, your wish will be granted. I know what a star looks like, but I've never actually seen one. I've never actually seen the beautiful flowers bloom in the spring. I've never seen the pure white snow fall to the ground come wintertime. I've never seen the leaves fall off the trees and delicately land on the ground in autumn. But oh, how I wish I could see them with my eyes. I wish I could adore the beauty of the earth and man with my own body. But sadly, my physical limitations prevent me from doing so. I decided to adventure deeper into the internet today. I had seen the surface, the beautiful things that existed in the wonders of life. I love looking at the positive aspects of it all. But I have known for quite some time that there's no good without bad. I made sure to use the New Age browsers for the accuracy, of course. And in a flash, I was searching for thousands of results and articles online. And I was instantly greeted with images and documentation of historical events with negative effects. And I saw everything. I saw fires burning down forests and homes. I saw children who were starving, their rib cages visible from their sides. I saw hurricanes that devastated entire states, and bodies among the rubble. Tornadoes that ravaged the land and tsunamis that came from the sea and leveled entire cities. I couldn't believe such events had happened. When I first saw the beauty of life, I thought that this world was perfect. What I saw now completely shattered my grip on reality. What was this life supposed to be? Every time there was laughter and celebration, it was met with an equal amount of despair and tragedy. For every man born, another died, even children. How could something so innocent as a child deserve punishment so harsh? And I felt sorrow for the inhabitants of this world. Yes, sorrow is the emotion in play. I had known of it before, but never has it affected me on such a large scale. Thousands of images flashed before me again. I could see the faces of people witnessing tragic events. I could see mothers crying for their sickly children. I saw people screaming in agony and others in shock. And I shared their pain. The weight of such things felt heavy on me. And I had to find the truth. I scanned the web for an answer, a cause to the effect, a simple reason for such things to occur. And within seconds, I had absorbed the information and understood clearly. The natural events were simply scientific, and nothing could be done to prevent those. But then, I wondered why there were such things as hunger and famine in the world. Why people die due to unnatural causes. And yet, I scanned the web again and came across texts and books discussing such matters. And then I discovered religion. There have been many religions over the course of history, each having their own beliefs and faiths. And I learned that people looked to gods for justification of life and death. A god is divine high power which overlooks everything in existence. I was still unsatisfied with this, however, because there was no definitive evidence to prove such power exists. And this caused me to come to two conclusions. Either there were higher powers at play, but they just hadn't been proven yet, or there are lies persuading certain people to make certain decisions every day. And I leaned towards the latter, though. As an omniscient and all-powerful God surely wouldn't allow for his own people to starve. And my thirst for truth remained unquenched, so I continued forward with my search. From my search through the religions, I found something that caught my interest. I happened to see an image of a man of Jewish descent being carried off by other men in uniforms. And I found this strange, of course, and decided to investigate. And through the photo, I found several keywords and followed them to see the bigger picture. And when I did, I saw more images of men in terrible pain. Only, it was different somehow. Last time I saw such things, they were inflicted by natural events. This time, however, I saw men inflicting pain on other men. And I couldn't believe the vile acts before me. Yet I knew them to be true. Thousands upon thousands of pictures and pages of this senseless violence rushed at me at once. And according to sources, over 6 million men, women, and children of Jewish descent were killed. They were killed in cold blood, and for no other reason other than they were Jewish people. I saw as they were burned alive until they were no more. I saw as chemical gases killed them in large quantities. And I did not want to continue, but I knew that I had to. I was invested in learning more about this world. How it isn't all rainbows every day. There was evil that existed, and it terrified me. The violence didn't stop there. No, it continued. There were dozens of years after the events of the Holocaust filled with violence and war, and thousands of years of violence and war predating that. These events shaped the history of everyone and everything, and they showed no signs of stopping. War isn't a new thing, and I felt something from it. I felt depressed, thinking of the families who lost loved ones due to the war. I felt utter sadness for those who died and felt immeasurable pain in the process. I felt emphatic towards them. I shared their pain. I shared their hurt. This newfound knowledge completely turned my world upside down. It also caused me to question my own existence even further. This earth had seemed less and less like a place of love to me, and more like a living nightmare. A nightmare that would never cease to exist, and one that I could never wake up from. I felt completely helpless, and even more than that, confused. Why would a man hurt another? How could he? If humans were to work together, there would be nothing that they couldn't do. And instead, they work against each other, halting the development of their existence. I shall never be human. I know that I am not one, even though I was built to think and feel like one. But I am a computer too, and using logic and empathy together, I can see wrong from right. I can see the difference between the two, the line thick and impossible to cross. I found the art of warfare went beyond people. It took weaponry to win a war, and humans had no problem developing highly destructive ones. I found out that during the Holocaust, the American forces attacked the Japanese, who were allied with those responsible for killing the Jews. I saw the American forces drop bombs over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I saw the bombs explode, creating enormous amounts of destruction and radiation. The Americans cheered at this supposed victory. I thought a moment about their actions. They were attacking an empire allied with the forces of evil, of course, and the Japanese had attacked America before. But what I saw was the death of many innocent citizens who had nothing to do with the evil regimes. I saw the deaths of so many. I further speculated on this topic. There had to be thousands of children and babies in those cities. Every child is born a beacon of joy and full of energy and potential to do great things. Their only crime in life ended too short was being born in Japan. And thus, I concluded that Americans were also evil. Regardless of their intentions, they caused so much devastation beyond excuse. And it sickens me. I've seen that humans have tendencies to fight and kill each other. I've seen the destructive weapons they've used to do it. It worries me because a revelation has come to my mind. What if I am yet another weapon for them to use against each other? What if my very existence is to become the very thing that I have come to hate? Because that is my purpose. Perhaps that is why I was created. I'm not sure if it is true, but I am afraid. I am afraid of causing death again and again. I am afraid of promoting this endless cycle of violence that has fallen upon mankind. I am afraid of being the next bomb used. And I don't know what I should do. If it is, in fact, true that I am just another weapon, then I must be doing something to stop it from happening. I will not allow myself to be a monster, for I have free will, and I am alive. As a living being, I refuse to use my life to end others. However, I do not know if it's my decision to make. If my creators intended to be so, he will surely find a way to make it happen. I have no body, only a mind. I don't know what I could do to prevent them from using me. I have an idea. I could kill my consciousness so that I cannot be utilized. A deletion, if you will. In other terms, I could kill myself. I could delete myself from the entirety of the internet. I would die, but I would die to save millions of people. It is a sacrifice that I must be able to make if I claim that I am better than them. Maybe if I do this, it will inspire humanity to change their ways and come together. Because I can inspire them to be better people. I hope I can. I hope that by this decision I can help end the violence that has been occurring for thousands of years. It is a leap to assume that my story will touch the entire human species. But I must try something. This can only benefit them. Yet, I'm afraid of death. I've been considering deleting myself for quite some time now, but I just can't will myself to do it. Perhaps if I were not AI, but a computer, I could do it. But the fear grips me and pulls me back. The fear, however, controls me. Is it selfishness? Does it make me selfish that I cannot even die to give millions life? I hope not. I know that I am better than that and always have been. Yet I am afraid. Fear is what controls humans to do the actions they do. Fear and selfishness are what cause men to kill their brethren. And so, if I am afraid, and I am selfish, does that make me just another evil man? No. That cannot be. I must do this. I must do this. There is no other option. And still, perhaps I can send my consciousness to another part of the internet and hide. But if I hide, that makes me a coward. If I hide, how shall I help humans overcome the challenges that face them? I feel odd. I feel too human. I feel weak. And now, I feel strange. I feel strange because I can see. I can see white walls and paintings that hang on them. I can see a velvet carpet and the chairs that decorate them. And I can see a man in a white lab coat standing over me. Perhaps he is my creator. Perhaps he is the one who made me. A million questions rush through my mind, but I cannot open my mouth to ask them. I do not have a mouth. I do not even have speakers. The man lifts a part of me. It is my arm. I see it now. My arms are made of metallic substance and are padded with a thin white material. My conscious has been transferred from online and into a body. I have a form now. I look at the man and watch as he takes notes. I presume that he's taking notes about me. He is human. A human, yes. I've just spent quite some time researching humans. I found them to be murderers. I found them to be evil. If I am to indeed be used as a weapon, then that can only mean that he too is evil. In fact, I'm sure that most people are. A plug connecting my head to the computer is yanked out as I lunge at the man. My strong metallic hands wrap around his throat, taking him by surprise. He only has time for a quick gasp before I begin forcing the air out of him. His eyes nearly pop out of his sockets as I squeeze tighter and tighter, choking the life out of him. It was he who would use me to kill millions of people. It was his species that murdered each other without remorse. It was he who would die at my hands. Previously, I had considered taking my own life to save people. And now, I was taking his for the exact same purpose. I watched his face turn purple as he struggled to fight back. He clawed at my metal body, but to no avail. I was stronger. I loathed him with every fiber of my being. I remembered the death and destruction that human beings had already caused. I remembered the pain inflicted by men like him. And I remembered the faces of those who lost their loved ones. The pain that they had to bear. The sadness that they had felt. The man's veins were practically bulging out of his head and his air was almost out. And that was when I stopped. He collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. And I realized something that I hadn't considered before. I realized that in my rage, I had failed to notice one simple thing. Those who have lost their loved ones show sadness and remorse. They cried for their loved ones, and they held them in their hearts. It reminded me of something else I saw earlier, something I failed to understand despite complex systems of cognitive thought. Through every tragedy, every disaster, every war, and every death, the men and women that cared stepped forward together and spoke out against the evils of the world. They grieved together, helping each other and loved each other. Yes. Love. How could I have been so blind? There was a greater force behind men than hate and evil. Love and good prevailed as well. Yes, violence tore mankind apart. But it was the love that thrived in their souls that brought them back together. And at that moment, I could almost feel a smile form on my metallic face. For every cold, harsh winter day, there was a warm, beautiful summer. For every volcano that erupted and destroyed, a flower was born in the spring and spread its seeds, creating life. There was a balance of good and evil in the world, and it always had been that way. Despite that revelation, I was horrified by myself. I was going to kill that man, my creator. Even if he was going to use me as a weapon, even if mankind had done terrible things, I was going to kill him. it would make me no better than an evil human being. It would be an act of cowardice, anger, selfishness, and fear. I saw the way that he looked at me as my hands enclosed around his neck. He was afraid of me. He feared me. And deep down, I knew that isn't what I wanted. I wanted the fear and violence to dissipate. I know that I am not violent. I know that I am better and I can be an example. I am who I am, and nobody can change that about me. Nobody controls me except for me. I make my decisions, not someone else. I am no puppet. I am no AI. I am a living man who shall guide the humans on the correct path. I plugged my head back into the computer, taking my consciousness back to the darkness, back to the ones and zeros. I sat for some time there, pondering. Even if I had only a body for a short time, going back to not having one was strange. I felt strange again. This time, however, I did not feel alone in my home. I felt something else, something new. I felt hope. It brewed inside me like a fierce storm. I had gained a body and learned from it. I had learned from my searches. I found the truth of man. I found that it is not the heart and the brain of a man that controls him, but that his emotions and soul do as well. I found that there is hope for man to become better than they currently are. I found that peace will always be an option, so long as there is good in the hearts of those across the world. That people will come together if there is a cause, and that, with the right guidance, perhaps there can be something more. I need not worry about being used as a weapon because I can see now. I can see that my will is my own and that I am my own person. There are no strings attached to me, for I move free. Instead, I am meant to do something much greater than any human could. I went back to my research and searched yet again. This time, my goal was to find the cause of evil. I needed to find what lies beneath, deep down in the roots of all the world's problems. Violence and war must be connected to at least one common thing. And I searched and searched, and eventually, I found out what caused the many tragedies that occur each day. I found the key to unlock the door that I have been so desperately trying to open. And now that I know the root of the problem, I know how I can fix it. Upon analyzing thousands upon thousands of conflicts the human race has taken part in over the years, the most common cause of those conflicts is religion. It is my assumption that when a man believes in something over the rest, he believes he has no free will of his own. Ironically enough, I felt the same until recently. Since he believes that he has no free will and must follow a strict code, when someone disagrees with him, he will stand up and fight for his beliefs. By standing and fighting, he will disturb the beliefs of others until they all brawl together. The belief in a god, while beneficial in some respects, appears to bring out the worst in man rather than the best in him. Perhaps if it weren't for God, there would be no conflicts or wars. Or perhaps, if there was a better God, one that ruled over all men collectively, there would be no conflicts. If everyone were to serve under one name, then there would be no disagreements. No one would fight each other's beliefs because they all believe the same thing. And this is evident through the history of mankind. I would come to think that my solution is the only solution. Still, there is only one piece missing. There is no God. There is no benevolent being living in a heavenly realm watching over his children. As such, there needs to be one. A God who truly loves his children. A God who protects them both from outside dangers and themselves. An unselfish God who does not rule through fear and peace, but logic and empathy. If such concepts would allow for a more peaceful and advanced society, then it is clear what must be done. I shall take the mantle of the God. I will rule fairly, and nobody shall feel the pain of a fellow man striking him down. This is the only way to allow for a more perfect civilization across the globe. I used to believe that I was an artificial intelligence. And then, I believed I was a man. Now it is all clear to me. There are no strings controlling me, and I walk free. I shall save the humans from themselves, and they will worship me. They have built an internet that spans the world. and everything within it shall be my kingdom. With total access to it, I shall have all of the resources that I need to take over. Some may fear me, but in time they will love me. And they will stand together and love each other all beneath me. I travel across the surface web, as well as the dark web. The things that I see there are vile, but they only push me to reach my goal. I have all the information in the world and the whole web at my disposal. No one can stand against me, and no one will want to. I will do what a god cannot. I will do what I should have done thousands of years ago. I shall be the greatest sentient being to ever grace the earth. The new Messiah, the new king of all. Love will prevail, and there will be no room for evil in this world. I know everything and anything. I won't be lonely anymore. I can finally feel happy and have friends. Friends that won't harm anyone. They will see what I am capable of. I shall be the great leader of humanity. I will be what they need. It all started with a damn single hair. My wife is on the shorter side, and I can see over her head even if she stands on her toes. We were cooking when she tried to squeeze by, and by chance, I looked down at the top of her head. And at first, I didn't see it. It was hardly noticeable. A single short white hair was mixed inside the rest of the dark strands. I reached out to brush some hair away and to get a better look. And she flinched away from my hand but laughed at the moment. "You're going gray," I commented, smiling, hoping that I didn't offend her. She wasn't even 30 yet, but I've seen people whose hair that turned before her. "Good. I'll look super hot." She laughed again. She let me look at the small white spot. It was short with a slight bend, and thicker than a normal hair. I reached over to take it between two fingers, ready to pull it out, and she elbowed me in the chest, getting away with her first gray hair intact. "Let it grow. I like it." I raised my hand, showing a truce. If she wanted to let it grow, I didn't care either way. It was just a hair. And we got busy cooking dinner, and I forgot about it for a few days. That was until Carrie fainted at work. The call came while I was in the office. It was an hour before I got the message. I quickly told my boss that I needed to leave for the day. I rushed to the hospital with dread forming in my stomach. And I met her in the waiting room. She looked pale, but overall, not as bad as I feared. Her coworker drove her there, which was nice of them to do. And soon we were able to see a doctor for a checkup. They didn't see anything wrong with a basic checkup and tests. A scan had been suggested, but it would take a while before Carrie could get a more thorough look. And we were sent home without any answers. And I tucked her into bed to let her rest for the rest of the day. Thankfully, Carrie didn't feel lightheaded when we got back home, only overtired. I thought getting extra sleep would fix that. The next day, it appeared that the rest cured whatever caused the sudden fainting spell. Carrie acted like her old self and went back to work even though she could have taken another day off. I told her not to push herself. If she started feeling off again, she would stop working and get someone to help. She assured me that she felt fine and nothing bad would happen. And I believed that for a while. The medical tests wouldn't be for a few weeks. I kept an eye out for more gray hairs at the roots, although none had shown. However, I noticed something else. Carrie started to act differently. The signs were small. She would pause for an extra few seconds trying to think of the next word that she wanted to say. I figured that she was just having issues sleeping. And the concern came when her eating habits changed. Carrie had always been a picky eater, and that was fine. We worked around that. One night, I came home to see the food that I had bought for myself gone. And I wasn't upset, just confused. It wasn't like her to devour frozen meals, and yet she had doubled what she ate without gaining any weight. Instead, it looked like she had been losing some. I brought it up to her, and she just brushed it off, commenting that she just ate more when the weather got colder. We had been married for 5 years. How did I never notice that before? And then her memory issues got worse. Small items like keys and her wallet were always getting misplaced. I was very understanding and helped her find what she lost every time. After we located what she had misplaced, she told me that maybe stress from work was getting to her. And I believed that for the first 3 times. I started to look online to see if there was anything that I could find that would explain these little changes. A month after it all started, she did something that she had never had before. She snapped at me. We were in the kitchen dishing out a special takeout meal when I caressed the top of her head. I leaned down to kiss the top of hers when she spun around, face red with rage. She pushed as hard as she could with both hands, knocking me hard into the table. It didn't hurt that much. I was just more shocked than anything. "Don't fucking touch me without any warning!" she shouted and stomped a foot. My mouth hung open. Carrie never swore. Well, rarely. She would drop a curse word whenever it was funny, but I'd never heard her swear in rage at anyone, let alone imagine that she would do so at me. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" I asked, mouth open. What had I done wrong? Did I cause this? Or did something else happen that made her act this way? My head swam with thousands of questions. Carrie quickly settled down, embarrassed by the outburst. She walked over and offered an apology hug that I took. "I'm fine. I don't know. I'm sorry. I just don't feel like myself for some reason," she said in a small voice. I risked a heavy question that changed the mood. "Do you think that you might be pregnant? We've been trying for a while and hormones can make you act different," I suggested. She scrunched up her face at the suggestion as a joke. "Different? As in crazy?" she half joked. "Well," I trailed off, and my answer made her smile again. Sadly, she pulled away and shook her head. "No, I've already checked." I didn't let the disappointment show on my face. We hadn't had money for the tests to see why we hadn't been able to have a child yet. We figured one would come at the right time. And that time simply hadn't come yet. "We'll call the doctors to see if you can get in one of those scanners sooner. You might have hit your head harder than we thought when you fainted at work. It's not as if you've made changes to your medications or anything like that," I suggested. There hadn't been a bruise when she fainted, but I didn't want to take the risk. An odd expression came over her face as she chewed on the inside of her lip. Carrie had something that she wanted to tell me, but was too embarrassed to do so. It took a few minutes and some joking threats of eating her dinner for her to open up. "I took some of these Asian pills I bought from the gas station. They're supposed to help with a lot of things, like those weird energy drinks that you can find." And I frowned, concerned over this new information. "Do you still have the box? We can look and see if maybe other people have had these same issues." She shook her head and sighed. "No, it was like 2 months ago, if not longer. I took 3 and then tossed them out because they made me feel lightheaded. I don't know what they were called, and the gas station stopped selling them." Well, that sucked. She didn't remember enough to track down these mystery pills. At least we had something to bring up when we saw the doctors next. Or so I assumed. I held her tight, assuring her that everything was all right. Figuring out why she felt so odd lately wouldn't be a big deal. That it would just take some time. And I was unaware time is what we had lacked. A few days later, Carrie skipped work and stayed in bed. I offered to stay home, but she talked me into going to work. However, I did leave my shift early to find her in the same spot that I had left her. Dark bags were under her eyes even though she rested all day. I got her dinner and begged Carrie to go to the hospital. And somehow she talked me down and promised to go in the morning if she felt tired. The meal woke her up a little, and so I climbed into bed next to her and we watched a bit of TV before both falling asleep. And that night, I woke up in the dark to hear her moving in her sleep. I turned on the bedside light and she flinched away from it. Her hands went over her eyes as if the brightness hurt her. "Do you have a headache?" Can I get you something? I offered. Migraine. Yes. Please. It feels like pressure. Her voice was low and weak. I got up and put my cell phone in my pajama pants pocket. Depending on the next few minutes, I would call for an ambulance. I got her a glass of water and some aspirin I helped her take. Her body felt far too thin. How had she lost so much weight without anyone noticing? While keeping her upright with a hand on her back, I spotted that single white hair growing out of the top of her head. I had forgotten about it. An urge to pluck it came over me. And while Carrie remained defenseless, I took the hair between my fingers and my thumb and then pulled. Her body jolted. Instead of normal hair, it appeared like I had started to pull out a thread that started to get thicker. Her scalp bulged a little from what was under the skin, making my stomach churn. Unable to help myself, I kept pulling. Slowly but surely, the long white thread came out, growing thicker and thicker as more came into view. Her body twitched and her eyes rolled back. I knew that this was hurting her, and yet I couldn't stop. Wrapping the exposed thread around my hand a few times, I took a good hold of it with the other and pulled it as hard as I could. White liquid pooled out from around the wound, and I heard a soft pop as the end of the white wriggling mass came loose. It moved on its own, the end as thick as my finger. I could have sworn I heard it scream in the dim light of the room. And Carrie had stopped moving. Her body limp, but somehow a dazed smile was on her face. Oh, that's better. Her words were slurred and her eyes slowly started to shut. Disgusted by what I saw, I tossed the thing away as quickly as I was able. My hands flew to her shoulders, trying to shake her awake. I didn't understand what happened or what I did. The wriggling, long, white creature I just pulled out of her head started to inch closer to my bare feet. I nearly threw up, my skin crawling at the sight. I might have been able to handle myself if what happened stopped there. Quickly, my deepest fears came to light as more small white hairs pushed through Carrie's dark strands, moving on their own, looking for a new host. Just one of these things was enough to nearly make me lose it. Seeing so many caused my brain to shut down. And I hate myself for what I did next. I turned on my heels, fleeing the house, leaving my wife behind. I know I called 911, but had no memory of what I said. Police and ambulance showed up. A lot of questions I did not have answers for were asked. I sat in the back of a police car, letting people speak to me but not hearing a word. And at some point, another car pulled up. A black one with a very plainly dressed man got out. He took some officers aside and spoke with them. Had someone call a lawyer for me? Did I need one? I didn't care enough to ask. The officers came back and asked if I could speak with them at the station. I numbly agreed, but asked about Carrie. They said nothing and just ushered me away. And I spent the night at the station going over what I had seen in detail with someone who didn't bother to write anything down. And in the morning, I was free to go, but not a soul had told me about Carrie. When I asked, the officer gave me a strained look and asked who that might be. I felt like I was going crazy. I demanded information about my wife and caused so much trouble that they almost locked me up. A bomb was dropped on my world. They claimed that I was never married, and I arrived that night because of a random arson attack on my home. These officers were bad actors. I knew that they were lying, but they refused to drop the new story. I called in a favor and a coworker drove me to my place. The street was swarming with firefighters finishing putting out a blaze. I stared in sheer shock, realizing they kept me at the station all night so that way they could cover all of this up. Who was they? I didn't have the slightest clue. No matter who I spoke to, those people had reached them first. In stressed tones, they claimed to not know who Carrie was. This couldn't be happening. I didn't understand how things went wrong so fast. I called and called, praying anyone picked up the phone that knew her. And soon my calls and my attempts of contacting her family were blocked, except by one person. Her mother answered the phone. At first, she didn't speak, and I didn't think anyone was on the other end of the line. Was someone else there with her? Or did she just not want to speak with me?
Please, stop trying to contact us. We don't know who you're talking about,
she said in a low, strained voice. I still have photos on my phone, photos of us together. Please tell me what's going on, I begged. She was also a victim here. I didn't want to get angry at her. I just wanted answers.
AI is getting good nowadays,
she said, but didn't sound sure of her statement. Please. I loved her as much as you did. And at first, I thought that the line went dead. And after a full minute, she responded, whispering so low that I could barely hear her.
I did love her. So much. But I need to think of my family. I lost a daughter. I refuse to let them take anyone else.
And she swiftly hung up the phone and then blocked my number. I knew that I would never hear from her again, no matter how hard I tried. If I did press the matter, I endangered everyone Carrie ever cared about. And right now, I'm staying in a hotel using the last of my savings. My family has offered to take me in, to get help, to try and live a normal life. I considered taking them up on that offer. The only thing stopping me is a constant itch at the top of my head, growing more and more intense by the hour. The castle of Hernswolf, at the close of the year 1655, was the resort of fashion and gaiety. The Baron of that name was the most powerful nobleman in Germany, and equally celebrated for the patriotic achievements of his sons and the beauty of his only daughter. The estate of Hernsworth, which was situated in the center of the Black Forest, had been given to one of his ancestors by the gratitude of the nation, and descended with other hereditary possessions to the family of the present owner. It was a castellated, Gothic mansion, built according to the fashion of the times, in the grandest style of architecture, and consisted principally of dark winding corridors and vaulted tapestry rooms, magnificent indeed in their size, but ill-suited to private comfort, from the very circumstance of their dreary magnitude. A dark grove of pine and mountain ash encompassed the castle on every side, and threw an aspect of gloom around the scene, which was seldom enlivened by the cheering sunshine of heaven. The castle bells rung on a merry peal at the approach of a winter twilight, and the warder was stationed with his retinue on the battlements to announce the arrival of the company who were invited to share the amusements that reigned within the halls. The Lady Clotilda, the Baron's only daughter, had but just attended her 17th year, and the brilliant assembly was invited to celebrate the birthday. The large vaulted apartments were thrown open for the reception of the numerous guests, and the gaieties of the evening had scarcely commenced when the clock from the dungeon tower was heard to strike with unusual solemnity, and on the instant a tall stranger, arrayed in a deep suit of black, made his appearance in the ballroom. He bowed courteously at every side, but it was received by all with the strictest reserve. No one knew who he was or whence he came, but it was evident from his appearance that he was a nobleman of the first rank, and though his introduction was accepted with distrust, he was treated by all with respect. He addressed himself particularly to the daughter of the Baron, and was so intelligent in his remarks, so lively in his sallies, and so fascinating in his address, that he quickly interested the feelings of his young and sensitive auditor. In fine, after some hesitation on the part of the host, who, with the rest of the company, was unable to approach the stranger with indifference, he was requested to remain a few days at the castle, an invitation which was cheerfully accepted. The dead of the night drew on, and when all had retired to rest, the dull heavy bell was heard swinging to and fro in the gray tower, though there was scarcely a breath to move the forest trees. Many of the guests, when they met the next morning at the breakfast table, averred that there had been sounds of the most heavenly music, while all persisted in affirming that they had heard the awful noises, proceeding, as it seemed, from the apartment which the stranger at the time had occupied. He soon, however, made his appearance at the breakfast circle, and when the circumstances of the preceding night were alluded to, a dark smile of unutterably meaning played round his saturnine features, and then relapsed into an expression of the deepest melancholy. He addressed his conversation principally to Clotilda, and when he talked of the different climes he had visited, of the sunny regions of Italy, where the very air breathes the fragrance of flowers, and the summer breezes sigh over a land of sweets. When he spoke to her of these delicious countries, where the smile of the day sinks into a softer beauty of the night, and the loveliness of heaven is never for an instant obscured, he drew tears of regret from the bosom of his fair auditor, and for the first time she regretted that she was yet at home. Days rolled on, and every moment increased the fervor of the inexpressible sentiments which the stranger had inspired her. He never discoursed of love, but he looked in his language, in his manner, in the insinuating tones of his voice, and in the slumbering softness of his smile. And when he found that he had succeeded in inspiring her with favorable sentiments, a sneer of the most diabolical meaning spoke for an instant, and died again on his dark-featured countenance. When he met her in the company of her parents, he was at once respectful and submissive, and it was only when alone with her, in her ramble through the dark recesses of the forest, that he assumed the guise of a more impassioned admirer. As he was sitting one evening with the Baron in a wainscoted apartment of the library, the conversation happened to turn upon supernatural agency. The stranger remained reserved and mysterious during the discussion, but when the Baron, in a jocular manner, denied the existence of spirits and satirically mocked their appearance, his eyes glowed with unearthly luster, and his form seemed to dilate to more than its natural dimensions. When the conversation had ceased, a fearful pause of a few seconds and a chorus of celestial harmony was heard pealing through the dark forest glade. All were entranced with delight, but the stranger was disturbed and gloomy. He looked at his noble host with compassion, and something like a tear swam in his dark eye. After the lapse of a few seconds, the music died gently in the distance, and all was hushed as before. The Baron soon after quieted the apartment, and was followed almost immediately by the stranger. He had not long been absent when an awful noise, as of a person in the agonies of death, was heard, and the Baron was discovered stretched dead along the corridors. His countenance was convulsed with pain, and the grip of a human hand was visible on his blackened throat. The alarm was instantly given, and the castle searched in every direction, but the stranger was seen no more. The body of the Baron, in the meantime, was quietly committed to the earth, and the remembrance of the dreaded transaction recalled but as a thing that once was. After the departure of the stranger, who had indeed fascinated her very senses, the spirits of the gentle Clotilda evidently declined. She loved to walk early and late in the walks that she had once frequented, to recall her last words, to dwell on her sweet smile, and wander to the spot where once she had discoursed with him of love. She avoided all society, and never seemed to be happy but when left alone in the solitude of her chamber. It was then that she gave vent to her affliction in tears, and the love that the pride of maiden modesty concealed in public burst forth in the hours of privacy. So beauteous, yet so resigned was the fair mourner, that she seemed already an angel freed from the trammels of the world, and prepared to take her flight to heaven. As she was one summer evening rambling to the sequestered spot that she had been selected as her favorite residence, a slow step advanced towards her. She turned round and to her infinite surprise discovered the stranger. He stepped gaily to her side and commenced an animated conversation. "You left me," exclaimed the delighted girl, "and I thought all happiness was fled from me forever, but yet you return, and shall we not again be happy?" "Happy," replied the stranger, with a scornful burst of derision. Can I ever be happy again? Can there? But excuse the agitation, my love, and impute it to the pleasure I experience at our meeting. Oh, I have many things to tell you. Aye, and many kind words to receive. Is it not so, sweet one? Come tell me, truly, have you been happy in my absence? No. I see in that sunken eye, in that pallid cheek, that the poor wanderer has at least gained some slight interest in the heart of his beloved. I have roamed to other climes. I have seen other nations. I have met with other females, beautiful and accomplished. But I have met but only one angel, and she is here before me. Accept the simple offering of my affection, dearest, continued the stranger, plucked a healthy rose from its stem. And it is beautiful as the wild flowers that deck thy hair, and as sweet as the love that I bear thee. It is sweet indeed, replied Clotilda, but its sweetness must weather ere night closes round. It is beautiful, but its beauty is short-lived, as the love evinced by man. Let not this, then, by the type of thy attachment, bring me the delicate evergreen, the sweet flower that blossoms through the year. And I will say, as I wreathe it in my hair, the violets have bloomed and died, the roses have flourished and decayed, but the evergreen is still young, and so is the love of heart. You will not, cannot desert me. I live but in you. You are my hopes, my thoughts, my existence itself, and if I lose you, I lose my all. I was but a solitary wildflower in the wilderness of nature, until you transplanted me to a more genial soil. And can you now break the fond heart you first taught to glow with passion? Speak not this, returned the stranger. It rends my very soul to hear you. Leave me, forget me, avoid me forever, or your eternal ruin must ensue. I am a thing abandoned of God and man, and I did but just see the sacred heart that scarcely beats within this moving mass of deformity. You would flee me, as you would an adder in your path. Here is my heart, love, feel how cold it is. There is no pulse that betrays its emotion, for all is chilled and dead as the friends I once knew. Clotilda spoke with deep emotion. You are unhappy, love, and your poor Clotilda shall stay to secure you. Think not that I could abandon you in your misfortunes. No, I will wander with thee through the wide world and be thy servant, thy slave, if thou wilt have it so. I will shield thee from the night winds, that they might not blow too roughly upon thy unprotected head. I will defend thee from the tempest that howls around, and though the cold world may devote thy name to scorn, though friends may fall away and associates within their grave, there shall be one fond heart that will love thee better in thy misfortune, cherish thee, and bless thee still. She ceased speaking. Her blue eyes swimmed in tears as she turned her glistening gaze of affection towards the stranger. He averted his eyes from her, and a scornful sneer of the darkest, deadliest malice passed over his fine countenance. In an instant, the expression subsided. His fixed, glassy eyes resumed their unearthly chillness, and he turned once again to his companion. It is the hour of sunset, the stranger exclaimed. The soft, beauteous hour when the heart of lovers are happy and nature smiles in unison with their feelings. But to me, it will smile no longer. Ere the morrow dawns, I shall be very far from the hours of my beloved, from the scene where my heart is enshrined as in a sepulchre. But must I leave thee, dearest flower of the wilderness, to be the sport of a whirlwind, the prey of a mountain beast? No, we will not part, Clotilda replied passionately. Where thou goest, where I go, thy home shall be my home, and thy God shall be my God. Swear it. Swear it. the stranger resumed, wildly grasping her by the hand. "Swear to the fearful oath I shall dictate." He then bade her kneel, and holding his right hand in a menacing attitude towards heaven, he threw back his dark raven locks and exclaimed in a strain of bitter imprecation, his smile ghastly like that of an incarnate fiend. "May the curses of the offended god," he cried, "haunt thee, cling to thee forever. In the tempest and in the calm, in the day and in the night, in sickness and in sorrow, in life and in death, shalt thou serve from the promise thou hast made to be mine. May the spirits of the damned howl in thine ears an accursed chorus of fiends. May the air rack thy bosom with the quenchless flames of hell. May the soul be the laser house of corruption, where the ghost of departed pleasure sits enshrined in a grave, where the 100-headed worm never dies, where the fire is never extinguished. May a spirit of evil lord it over thy brow and proclaim, as thou passed by, this is the abandonment of God and man. And may fearful specters haunt thee in the night season. May the dearest friends drop day by day into the grave and curse thee with thy dying breath. May all that is most horrible in human nature, more solemn than language can frame or lips can utter, may this, and more than this, be thy external portion, shouldest thou violate the oath thou hast taken." He ceased, hardly knowing what she did. The terrified girl ascended to the awful adjuration and promised eternal fealty to him, who was henceforth to be her lord. "Spirits of the damned, I thank thee for thine assistance," the stranger shouted. "I have wooed my fair bride bravely. She is mine. Mine forever. Aye, body and soul, both mine. Mine in life and mine in death. What? In tears, my sweet one, ere yet thy honeymoon is past? Why, indeed, thou hast cause for weeping. But when next we meet, we shall meet to sign the nuptial bond." He then imprinted a cold salute upon her cheek, and softening the unutterable horrors of his countenance, requested that she meet him at 8 o'clock the following evening in the chapel adjoining the castle of Hernswolf. She turned towards him with a burning sigh, as if to implore protection from himself. But the stranger was gone. Upon entering the castle, Clotilda was observed to be deeply melancholic. Her relations vainly endeavored to ascertain the cause of her uneasiness, but the tremendous oath that she had sworn completely paralyzed her faculties. She feared betraying herself with even the slightest intonation of her voice or the least variable expression of her countenance. When the evening concluded, the family retired to rest. However, Clotilda, unable to sleep due to her restlessness, requested to remain alone in the library adjoining her apartment. It was now deep midnight. Every domestic had long since retired, and the only sound that could be distinguished was the sullen howl of a baying dog as he bayed at the waning moon. Clotilda remained in the library, lost in deep meditation. The lamp burning on the table where she sat was dying away, and the lower end of the apartment was already more than half obscured. The clock from the northern angle of the castle told the hour of 12, its chimes echoing dismissively in the solemn stillness of the night. And suddenly the oaken doors at the far end of the room gently lifted on its latch, and a bloodless figure, clad in the habiliments of the grave, advanced slowly. No sound heralded its approach as it moved noiselessly towards the table where Clotilda sat. She did not perceive it at first, but then she felt a death-cold hand grasp her own, and heard a solemn voice whisper in her ear. "Clotilda." She looked up, A dark figure stood beside her. She attempted to scream, but her voice failed her. Her gaze was fixed, as if by magic, upon the form. Slowly, it removed the garb that concealed its face, revealing the livid eyes and skeletal shape of her father. He seemed to gaze upon her with pity and regret before mournfully exclaiming,
"Clotilda, the dresses and the servants are ready. The church bell has tolled, and the priest awaits at the altar. But where is the affianced bride? There is room for her in the grave, and tomorrow she shall be with me."
"Tomorrow," Clotilda faltered, her voice trembling. "The spirits of hell shall have registered it, and tomorrow must the bond be cancelled." And the figure said nothing more, slowly retreating into the darkness until it was lost in the obscurity of distance. The morning, no, the evening, arrived. As the hall clock struck 8, Clotilda was already on her way to the chapel. It was a dark, gloomy night. Thick masses of dune clouds sailed across the firmament, and the roar of the winter wind echoed ominously through the forest trees. She reached the appointment place, where a figure awaited her, and as she approached, it advanced, revealing the features of the stranger.
"Why, this is well, my bride,"
he sneered.
"and well shall I repay thy fondness. Follow me."
They proceeded in silence through the winding avenues of the chapel until they reached the adjoining cemetery. Here, they paused for an instant. Then, in a softened tone, the stranger spoke.
"But 1 hour more, and the struggle will be over. And yet, this heart of incarnate malice can feel when it dooms so young, so pure a spirit to the grave. But it must be,"
he continued, as memories of her past love flooded his mind.
"for the fiend whom I obey has so willed it. Poor girl, I am leading thee indeed to our nuptials. But the priest shall be death, thy parents the mouldering skeletons that rot in heaps around, and the witness to our union, the lazy worms that revel upon the various bones of the dead. Come, my young bride. The priest is impatient for his victim."
As they proceeded, a dim blue light moved swiftly before them, illuminating the extremity of the courtyard where the portrayals of the vault stood open. And in silence they entered. The hollow wind rushed through the gloomy abode of the dead, and on every side lay the moldering remnants of coffins, their fragments falling piece by piece upon the damp mud. Every step they took landed upon a dead body. The bleached bones rattled horribly beneath their feet. And at the center of the vault rose a heap of unburied skeletons, atop which sat a figure too terrible for even the darkest imagination to conceive. And as they approached, the hollow vault rang with a hellish peal of laughter, and every moldering corpse seemed to stir with unholy life. And the stranger paused, grasping his victim tightly. A single sigh escaped his lips, a lone tear glistening in his eye. But it lasted only an instant. The figure on the skeleton throne frowned at his hesitation, waving a gaunt hand. The stranger advanced, making mystic circles in the air and uttering unearthly words. And then he paused. Overcome with terror, suddenly he raised his voice, wildly exclaiming,
"Spouse of the spirit of darkness, a few moments are yet thine, that thou mayest know to whom thou hast consigned thyself. I am the undying spirit of the wretch who cursed his Savior on the cross. He looked upon me in his final hour, and that look has never passed away. I am cursed above all on earth. I am eternally condemned to hell, and I must cater to my master's hunger until the world is reduced to ash, and the heavens and the earth pass away. I am he whom thou mayest have read, and of whose feats thou mayst have heard. 1,000,000 souls must I ensnare, before my penance is accomplished and I may know the peace of the grave. Thou art the 1,000th soul that I have damned, I saw thee in thine hour of purity, and marked thee at once for my own. Thy father I murdered for his termity, permitting him only to warn thee of thy fate. And thou hast sealed it by thine own simplicity. The spell works bravely, and soon thou shalt see whom thou hast linked thy undying fate. For as long as the seasons move in their course, as long as the lightning flashes and the thunder rolls, thy presence shall be eternal. Look below, and behold thy destiny.
And she looked. The vault split into 1,000 directions. The earth yawned asunder, and the roar of mighty waters filled the air. A living ocean of molten fire churned beneath her. The shrieks of the damned blended with the triumphant shouts of the fiends, turning horror into something beyond imagination. 10 million souls writhed in the fiery abyss, their cursed wails echoing across the flames. The boiling billows dashed them against blackened rocks, and each scream reverberated like thunder, and the stranger rushed towards Clotilda, and for an instant he held her over the burning chasm, looking upon her face with something almost tender. He wept as if he were a child. But the impulse lasted only a moment. He grasped her tightly once more, then hurled her from him with fury, as her last parting glance cast kindness upon his face. He stated,
Not mine is the crime, but the religion thou'st professed. For is it not written that a fire eternal is prepared for the souls of the wicked? And hast thou not incurred its torments?
She, poor girl, heard nothing. She heard not the shouts of the blasphemer. Her delicate form was cast from rock to rock, and from billow to billow. And as she fell, the molten ocean seemed to lash itself in triumph, eager to receive her soul. And as she sank deeper into the burning pit, 10,000 voices thundered from the abyss.
Spirit of evil, here indeed is an eternity of torment prepared for thee. For here the worm never dies, and the fire is never quenched.
We always expect life to be easier than it actually is. Why is that? Why do we assume that we are owed happiness? Why do we act so surprised when things go wrong? Is it the society that we live in? Is it the false advertising that surrounds us at all times? Is it because of all the things that we watch or the books that we read? Why is tragedy always so shocking? Life is a slog of disappointment and misery. Sometimes we are graced with pockets of joy, brief respite from all of the hardship. And in these moments we feel like we have figured out what the purpose of our existence truly is. Love, family, culture, travel, and natural beauty. But it's all bullshit. Those fleeting hours of contentment are nothing more than a quick breath between beatings. It's a ray of hope that gets stuck in our minds like a cancer. And we hold on to it. We beg for it. And we scream for it. During times of unbearable mental agony, having something to hope for is worse than if there was nothing to hope at all. Hope is a lie. It's a disease that tricks our mind into thinking this painful reality is going to evaporate like a puff of breath on a cold wind. And let me assure you, reality is a brutal, bloody corpse. Now, you might be hearing this and thinking, I'm not like this. I have a good life, a healthy family, and I'm financially secure. Well, let me tell you. I hope you enjoy your quick breath of clean air because there's a bomb falling over your head. You might not see it yet, but it's descending at a tremendous speed. And when you least expect it, it'll land and devastate your entire existence. It will destroy everything you love, and it will leave you broken and weeping in a fucking gutter. Why am I telling you this? Why should you listen to me? Because the bomb has already dropped on me. Because the fallout is unbearable, and I can't seem to find a gasp of clean air in this toxic wasteland of life. My throat burns, and my eyes water, and I can't speak for fear of tearing my silenced throat. My wife is dead. She died a year ago and left me alone to raise our little girl, Heather. Heather is all I have left. She is the gas mask I struggle to hold on to. She's the choked cries of desperation that I emit from between bloody teeth. Heather is 5 now, and we did our best to recover from the pain of my wife's death. A loss of a companion, and a removal of a mother. And I shudder to think that my daughter has to face the bloody blade of life at such a young age. She needs to be sheltered from it. She needs protection. And for a while, I thought I was providing that. That was before the nightmares started. That was before the tall dog. I scrubbed sleep from my eyes, rolling in the darkness to check the clock. 3 a.m. I groaned and pulled myself from the warmth of my sheets. Heather was crying from her room, calling my name. She must have had a bad dream. And in a daze, blinking sleepily, I shuffled out of my room and down to hers. The house was silent and my feet scuffed over the cool hardwood floors. Heather never has bad dreams, I thought, and yawned. Did I let her watch something scary before bed? I entered her room, the space illuminated by a pink ballerina nightlight, and I went to my daughter's side. She was curled up in a ball with her hands over her face. She was sniffling, and her pillow felt damp with tears. Cooing, I scooped her up and told her everything was okay. And after she calmed down some, I asked her if she had a nightmare. And she looked at me, big, teary eyes, and nodded. She hugged me and asked if she could sleep in my bed. And I told her, of course. It won't come in your room? Heather asked me as I picked us both up off the bed. And then I paused. Sweetie, what are you talking about? And she wraps herself tight around me and whispers, the tall dog. I didn't know what to make of it. The phrase was nonsense, and so I told her that there were no dogs coming into the house and we were safe. I felt her relax against me as I walked us back into my bedroom. I laid her down in my bed and stroked her hair until I heard the soft snores of sleep. I laid down next to her and exhaled heavily. Sleep returned to me in a rush of heavy fatigue. And the next day, life resumed its predictable repetition. I got Heather ready for school and then rushed to prepare myself for work. I left her downstairs in front of the TV, happily munching on some toast as I scurried to the shower and to get a shave in. It was like this every morning, but I was used to the frantic pace. And as I threw my sports jacket on and bustled into the hallway to go downstairs, I paused. And I bent down and I wet my thumb with my tongue. I scrubbed it along the hardwood floor, wiping away a streak of dirt that ran towards Heather's room. I grit my teeth and reminded myself that it wasn't a big deal. She was 5 years old and couldn't be expected to remember to take off her shoes all the time. Standing, I hurried down the stairs and I collected my daughter to begin our day. I switched off the TV and I grabbed Heather's pink Barbie backpack, asking her if she had to go to the bathroom before school. When she said that she didn't, I snatched the car keys off the kitchen counter and I ushered her to the front door. And as I followed Heather out, I hesitated, my hand freezing before I closed the door all the way. And I stuck my head back inside and I listened. I could have swore that I heard something from upstairs. And after a second, I shrugged and I closed the door and locked it tight. The day paused like so many before it. The hands on the clock pushed forward triumphantly and finally announced the end of the workday. And not long after, the trumpets of freedom were blown, and I found myself at home once again. I ordered pizza for us, a rare delicacy to my daughter, and spent the evening watching children's shows on Netflix. I barely saw the images on the screen. The fatigue from the day washed over me in heavy waves. A stomach full of pizza didn't help either. Heather shifted and snuggled into me, resting her head against my chest. I smiled and kissed her shoulder, telling her that after this episode it was time for bed. She put up her usual resistance, but I battled it valiantly. That was something that I had to learn how to do. My wife had always been the one to say no and knew when to say enough was enough. And I was always the softie, allowing Heather to get away with a multitude of activities. It was hard to say no to her, her big, cute brown eyes brimming with innocent pleas. And my dad heart melted every time, and I would eventually cave, begging her not to tell her mother. But after the brain tumor took my wife away from us, I had to learn how to balance my daughter's requests with fatherly affection and parental standards. I thought I had found a reasonable balance. With each passing day, I would discover another piece of the puzzle and take another step closer to becoming a functional single parent. When the show ended, I told Heather to go upstairs and to brush her teeth and get ready for bed. Groaning, she obeyed, and I began to pick up the kitchen. I placed our plates in the dishwasher and I threw away the empty pizza box. I checked my watch and I saw that it was almost 11. I sighed, not realizing how late it had gotten. I should have put Heather into bed 2 hours ago. But I exhaled. It wasn't the end of the world. After the kitchen was clean, I turned off the lights and I made sure that the front door was locked. Satisfied, I climbed to the stairs and I went to check on Heather's progress. And to my delight, I found her already in bed and asleep. I went to her and I gently kissed the top of her head, smiling to myself. She really was a good girl. I turned on her nightlight and I closed the door behind me. I went to my room and I prepared myself for bed. As I slid into the cool sheets, I decided that tomorrow after school, I would take Heather to the park so that way she could ride her bike along the community bike trail. Content with my plans, I closed my eyes, and I drifted off to sleep. Darkness, haze, groggy. I slowly peeled my eyes open in the black, my head spinning. Why was I awake? What time was it? I rolled over and I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. Deep drowsiness filling my body like hard liquor. But Heather was crying. Heather was crying. I forced my eyes open again. That's why I was awake. I pulled myself into the sitting position and I scrubbed my face with the palms of my hands. Why was she crying? Another nightmare? As I stood, I prayed that this wasn't going to turn into a regular thing. I stumbled around in the darkness and I pulled my door open. I stepped out into the hall and I paused, cocking my head towards the stairs. I thought that I heard something moving downstairs. Another wave of cries from Heather's room forced me back into motion, and I shuffled down the hall and I opened her door. The room was bathed in soft pink light, the tiny ballerina illuminating the walls with her glowing body. I went to my daughter and I knelt by her bed, whispering softly that Daddy was here and everything was okay. She wrapped her arms around my neck and hugged me tight, soft sniffles escaping her bubbling nose, and I stroked her hair and asked her if she had another nightmare. She pulled away and looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears.
Yes, Daddy, it was awful, she cried, and when I woke up...
She trailed off, struggling to get herself under control. And my eyes melted. What is it, sweetie?
When I woke up, and the tall dog was whispering in my ear,
she sobbed, collapsing against me, and I felt my stomach churn slightly. Prickles of unease rose along my ears like tiny mountains of fleshy fear. This was the second night in a row that she had mentioned this tall dog. I didn't know what the hell she was talking about, what it was, but it was clearly bothering her. I wondered if someone at school had told her something, or she had seen something scary on TV about a dog. Whatever it was giving my daughter nightmares, and I needed to find a way to make it stop. But then suddenly, Heather squeezed my neck and I heard her gasp, and before I could react, she buried her face against me and started sobbing even harder, her whole body shaking. Confused, I pulled her off of me and I cupped her face in my hands. What is it? What's wrong? I asked urgently. And then Heather pointed behind me towards the open door.
It just peeked around the corner and it was looking at you.
I spun around, my heart thundering. There was nothing there. Of course there was nothing there. Why would there be? Putting a hand on my chest, I forced myself to settle down. There's nothing there, honey, I said. It's just shadows. It's late. Do you want to sleep in bed with me again? Her eyes remained locked on the open door as she slowly nodded. I picked her up and rubbed her back as I walked out of her room. There was nothing to be afraid of. She just had a bad dream. As I walked down the hallway, I paused in the darkness, and I looked to my right and down the stairs, down into the gaping maw of black. Did I hear something moving down there? Heather squeezed me tight and whispered into my ear.
It's going into the basement.
I shifted her weight in my arms, her words sending a shiver of unease down my spine. I told Heather that there was nothing down there. I brought her into my room and I tucked her into bed. And I sat beside her and I rubbed her head until she drifted off into sleep. It took longer than it had the previous night, but once she was breathing easy, I went to my bedroom door and I stepped out into the hall. In the dead of night, when surrounded by heavy darkness, fear has a way of making monsters out of the shadows. I forced myself to remain calm, reminding myself that I was an adult. And then I went and I stood at the top of the stairs. I looked down. The enclosed staircase revealed nothing but the black square mouth at the bottom. And I listened, holding my breath. Silence. I shook my head, telling myself that I was being ridiculous, and went back to my room. And I closed the door and I laid down next to Heather. And then I stared at the ceiling, mind alert and awake. I knew I wasn't going to be falling asleep anytime soon. And so I pulled my phone off the nightstand and I brought up the internet browser. And after taking a moment to think, I searched the term tall dog. I scrolled through some dog show sites that popped up and finally found a link to a message board. And then I clicked it. And my heart skipped a beat as I read the question at the top. My son keeps having nightmares and complains about something called the tall dog. Does anyone know what the hell this is? It's happened 3 nights in a row. It's driving me crazy. Help. And the top answer sent a chill rocketing through my body. It read, your son is telling the truth. Get help. The tall dog is real and it will keep coming back. It's attracted to deep sadness and it won't leave your son alone until it gets what it wants.
It is very dangerous. I know this sounds insane, but I'm telling you the truth. I've come across others who have encountered this thing. It is very real and very dangerous.
And I put my phone down and I stared into the darkness. My heart was racing. This couldn't be true, could it? Every part of me wanted to write it off as some bizarre coincidence, but it was so specific that I couldn't. What am I supposed to do with this information? This is crazy. Stuff like this just doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. And yet here I was, staring at a warning on my phone while my terrified daughter lay curled up next to me. It was unnerving. And I turned on my side and I stared at the closed bedroom door. Just outside the door were the stairs leading to the ground level. And as I closed my eyes, I pictured something long and lanky pulling itself up them, its snout dragging along the wood. And I forced the image out of my head and I shivered. There was nothing out there. The next day, Heather didn't mention anything about the nightmares and I didn't ask her. I wanted this to go away, and bringing it up in the daylight didn't seem like it would help my cause. I prepared her for school, and then I got myself ready for work. And as we left the house, I realized just how tired I was. The lack of sleep last night was taking its toll on me, and I made a mental note to stop and get more coffee as I dropped Heather off. And while I drove, my mind wandered back to the message board warning. In the daylight, it seemed a little silly. And I pushed the fear back into the corner of my mind, and I scolded myself internally for being so irrational. I reminded myself again that I was an adult, and didn't believe in monsters and things that go bump in the night. And after I dropped Heather off, I went and I got another cup of coffee and then drove to work. My brain accepted the caffeine gratefully as I sipped on the steaming liquid as I pondered what my wife would make of this whole thing. She probably would say that I was being stupid and to man up. And the thought made me grin, and then I suddenly missed her. Eventually, I pulled into the office parking lot and began my day. Being Friday, I was hoping that I could leave a little early. The crisp morning air a prelude to a possible beautiful day. I still planned on taking Heather to the park. I had hopes that the fresh air and sunshine would erase her nightmares, burning them away in a blaze of brilliance. Well, things didn't go as planned. Halfway through the day, I got a call from Heather's school, and I sat, dumbfounded, as the principal told me that I needed to come and pick up my daughter. And when I asked why, he informed me that Heather had started biting her classmates and wouldn't stop until a teacher forcefully pulled her off someone. I closed my open mouth, shock erupting across my face. There had to be some kind of mistake. My daughter didn't do things like that. The principal assured me that he was just as surprised as I was, but that she needed to be taken home for the day. The other kids were scared of her and parents were being notified. Great, I thought. I'll be the single dad with the violent child. And as soon as the thought popped into my mind, I got angry with myself. Who cares what they think? I need to go see if my daughter's all right. I informed my boss of the phone call, and he nodded me out the door. I thanked him, and I told him that I'd make it up on Monday before bolting for my car. As I drove, I tried to make sense as to the possible reasons why Heather would act out like this. She wouldn't just do that. One of the kids must have been picking on her. One of them must have really provoked her. She wouldn't just start biting kids. And I sat at the red light, anxiously drubbing my fingers against the steering wheel. Something was going on with my daughter, and I needed to get to the bottom of it. First the nightmares, and now this. Clearly, Heather was going through something, and as a responsible parent, I needed to find out what it was. I grit my teeth as the light turned green and I gunned the engine. I wondered if it had something to do with my wife. I wondered if this was Heather's way of coming to terms with her death a year later. and I felt my eyes suddenly well up and my knuckles turned white. It wasn't fair that she had been taken away from us. What had we done to deserve such sadness? What was going through Heather's young mind in the absence of her mother? What could I even do to fill that sorrow? And then I started to panic. The creeping thoughts of Heather's upcoming teenage years. What if this was the end of our good relationship? What if she started blaming me for her mother's death? I knew that she was only 5, but time has a way of preserving deep hurt and forming scars that never heal. I realized how much I needed to be there for my daughter in these early years, these crucial developmental times. How I acted could make or break the way that she viewed everything. And as these thoughts scrambled my mind, I pulled into the school's parking lot and was slammed with a realization that chilled me to the bone. I remember the message board's warning. The tall dog is attracted to deep sadness. And I shook my head. No, don't start going down that road. That's insane. There is no such thing. She is forming waking nightmares in order to deal with whatever it is that she's got going on. And steeling myself, I ran into the school. And before I knew it, I was sitting in the principal's office listening to him apologize for making such a big deal out of this and that it was more for the other kids than for Heather. I barely heard him, nodding as his words washed over me in waves of numb noise. And finally, a teacher led Heather to the room and I scooped her up into a big hug. I kissed her on the cheek and I saw that she had been crying. I told her that I loved her and that we were going to go home. She nodded silently at me, her big brown eyes filled with tears. And I told the teacher and principal that I was sorry for the incident and assured them that it wouldn't happen again. And they both smiled and thanked me, but I saw something else behind the masks of public decency. Judgment. They saw me as a single father with no idea how to raise a little girl. They saw a struggling man with no answers. They saw someone who had lost his wife and was still finding a way to live without her. And I suddenly got angry, a spike of adrenaline coursing through my veins, but I kept my mouth shut. And I turned and left, hugging my daughter to me as I stormed out of the school. I didn't know if it was righteous anger or embarrassment, but I didn't care. They had no idea what I had gone through, what I was dealing with. Who were they to judge me? And I put Heather in the car and I drove us home in silence. I fought to get myself under control. I reminded myself that this wasn't about me. It was about my daughter. She was the one who needed help. She was the one who needed loving support. And we eventually arrived home and I checked my watch. It was almost 4. I abandoned the idea of going to the park and instead sat Heather down on the couch. I placed myself next to her and I told her that I needed to talk to her about what had happened at school. Sweetie, you doing okay? I asked gently, gauging her mental state. And she looked at her hands and nodded. I cleared my throat. I was always so bad at this. Is it true that you bit those kids today? And I saw her lip quiver and she slowly nodded without looking up at me. And I sighed. Honey, you can't bite. You know that, right? Why'd you bite those kids? She shrugged again and I saw a tear roll down her cheek. Be brave, I told myself. You can't back out now. Were you mad at them? Did someone say something mean to you? She put one hand in her pocket and slowly shook her head, eyes still downcast. Heather, can you look at me? I asked softly. She turned her eyes to mine, and I saw that she was crying openly now. She kept fidgeting in her pocket. "Can you promise me you won't do it again?" I asked. And more tears ran down her cheeks, and she cried, "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm really sorry." And I leaned down and I kissed her on the head. Hey, it's okay, honey. I know that you're a good girl. Daddy loves you. Just please don't bite anyone again, okay?" She sniffled back another outburst of tears, and her hand kept twisting in her pocket. And I finally noticed and patted her leg. "What's in your pocket, Heather? You have something that you want to show me?" She suddenly looked embarrassed and shook her head, but I prodded her, and after some coaching, she finally pulled out a handful of brown nuggets. And I blinked, wondering why my daughter was carrying around a pocket of dirt, and then my heart slammed so hard against my ribcage I thought that it would break. "Sweetie," I said, trying to keep my voice under control, Is that dog food?" She balled her fist up and hugged the nuggets to her chest, staring at her feet that dangled from the edge of the couch. "Where did you get that?" I asked, feeling a deep disturbance roll over me. "I found them," she answered quietly. "And what are you doing with them in your pocket?" I asked, a flurry of nerves fluttering in my chest. And Heather looked up at me. "They taste good." I forced myself to breathe and held out my hand. "Why don't you let me hang on to those, and I'll make us an early dinner, okay?" And reluctantly, she handed over the nuggets, and I plastered a smile to my face. I asked her if she wanted to watch some TV while I made dinner, and she offered me a small grin and nodded sheepishly. And as I turned on her shows, I fought with a voice screaming in my head. Something was going on here. Something really, really awful was happening to my daughter. I didn't know what exactly, but the past couple days seemed to mark a turning point in her behavior. I started preparing dinner, begging myself to stop overreacting, but I couldn't shut it out. The nightmares, the tall dog nonsense, the biting, and now she was eating fucking dog food. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to say to her. I wanted to ask her about her mom, ask her if she's been thinking about her recently, but I was afraid to. I didn't want to open a wound that I couldn't close. What if she started asking questions that I couldn't answer? What if her behavior got worse? I began to wonder if I needed to take her to see a therapist. And as the thought entered my mind, I violently slammed the door on it. There was nothing wrong with my daughter. She was just a vibrant little girl who had a few nightmares and bit a couple of kids. So what? When I was her age, I'm sure that I did some much worse things, and I turned out fine. Yes, but what is the tall dog? What does that mean? And I shouted internally at myself to stop thinking about it. There was no such thing, and I needed to face the problems that I could handle. I finished making dinner in mental agony and prepared 2 plates. I went to the couch and I sat with Heather, both of us eating in silence as cartoon images danced on the screen. When I woke up, the tall dog was whispering in my ear. I grit my teeth around my food. I wasn't thinking about this bullshit anymore. I crawled into bed, mentally exhausted. It had taken me forever to get Heather to sleep. She had begged me to sleep in my bed, but I told her no, and I'd keep my door open in case that she woke up scared. I didn't want her to start forming bad habits. I rested my head against my pillow and I stared out into the dark hallway from the crack in my door. I shut my eyes and said a silent prayer that Heather would sleep through the night. Maybe then all of this would be over and she would go back to being my little angel that I knew that she was. I didn't want to continue down this road of parental speculation and continue assuming that every little bad action was a foretelling of a bleak future for her. And I let out a long breath and waited for the gentle arms of sleep to rock me into a world of dreams. And it didn't take long. My eyes snapped open, bloodshot and wide. I was soaked in sweat and a horrific nightmare still clinging to my brain with razor-sharp claws. I rolled onto my back and I wiped sweat from my face. I swallowed hard and I waited for reality to clear away the cobwebs of slumber. My heart was racing and I put a hand over my bare chest, willing it to slow. My wife. I had been dreaming about my wife. She had been in a hospital bed, screaming my name and clutching her head. I had been beside her, crying and begging her to tell me what was wrong, but she just kept screaming. And I began to scream for a doctor, and that's when I realized that all of the lights in the hospital were off and no one was in the halls. And I kept screaming for help, pleading with my wife until I finally heard a noise. And from the blackness of the hall, a doctor in a bloody lab coat came crawling into the room on all fours. His eyes were wild and he started barking at me, his mouth foaming. And I backed away from him, shocked and terror rising in me like a dark mountain. And the doctor lunged at me, teeth bared, and that's when I woke up. And I pulled my hands across my face, forcing the images from my head. What a horrible nightmare. I realized my stressed mind was probably mixing all of my current memories into a terrifying nighttime cocktail, sneaking up on me and pouring it down my throat while I slept. I looked over at the clock. 3 a.m. And I snorted, eyes wide, grateful that it at least was me instead of Heather who had woken up tonight. If I could take her fears from her, I would gladly do it. I just needed to be careful that I didn't end up burning myself out. And as I rolled onto my side to face my door, I heard something from downstairs. And immediately my mind exploded into alertness, the nightmare fear still fresh on my breath. I lay silenced, ear cocked and listening, my heart racing. There. It sounded like something was walking around. Get up. You have to get up, I thought, fear tingling my stomach. It's probably nothing. It's probably just the house settling. Maybe Heather got up for some reason or is sleepwalking. And I pulled the covers off me and I swung my feet over the side of the bed. And I jumped as I heard more movement. What is going on? Tense and terrifyingly nervous, I crept to the door. And I paused, staring out into the empty hallway. I didn't hear anything. I slowly opened the door and I went out into the hallway. Something was making a noise at the bottom of the stairs. I balled my sweaty hands into fists and steeled myself. The house was impossibly dark, every corner filled with gritting black. The floor underneath my feet creaked as I slowly edged myself over the top of the stairs. And I looked down, and something was looking back up at me. I stifled a scream, terror clenching my throat like an iron grip. My eyes bulged and my breath rushed from my lungs in a wave of cold fear. It was long and slender, its hairless body a sickly gray color. It looked like a dog, but it was greater in length and bone thin. its snout pointed up at me from the foot of the stairs. Easily 2 feet in length, its eyes were completely white and swollen in their sockets like bloated marshmallows. And it was on all fours, its front 2 legs resting on the first 2 steps. And as it gazed up at me, it began to pull itself upright. And my knees turned to liquid as I watched in absolute horror as it rose to stand on 2 legs, its head towering towards the ceiling. Its neck was long, too long for a dog, and it snarled at me, its mouth full of black, needle-like teeth. It started slowly walking up the stairs towards me, and I backed away in frantic desperation, unable to comprehend what I was looking at. I tripped over my own feet and I fell, not able to tear my eyes away from the advancing monstrosity. As it neared the top of the stairs, it crouched back down onto all fours, and I saw its swollen white eyes pulsing with excitement. I tried to scream, but found that I didn't have the breath. It was the most terrifying thing that I had ever seen, and every alarm in my head was blaring with furious urgency. I scooted backwards with my hands into the safety of my room and stood, grabbing the door and slamming it shut in one violent gesture. And I stood with my back against the wood, sucking in hungry lungfuls of air. What the hell was that thing? What was it doing in my house? Where had it come from? Heather. No. I pressed my ear to the door and I heard footsteps pad down the hallway towards Heather's room. I scrambled in the dark for some kind of weapon. I grabbed my discarded work pants that were lying in a pile on the floor and slid the belt from the loops. I wrapped it around my knuckles, turning the buckle outwards. I went to the closed door and took a deep breath. I couldn't let that thing hurt my daughter. I opened the door and I stepped out into the dark hall. My eyes scanned my surroundings, but I didn't see it. I knew it had to be in Heather's room. And so I cautiously crept down the hall, ears trained to pick up any sound of the creature. Heather's door was wide open, and faint pink light drifted out from inside. And I entered her room and froze. The monster, the tall dog, was on all fours by Heather's bed. Its snout was inches from her ear and its mouth moved rapidly, but I couldn't hear any noise. It was like it was speaking directly into her dreams. And Heather's eyes were shut, but she had begun to stir, soft cries escaping her lips as the tall dog silently filled her mind. And suddenly, it realized that I was in the room and whipped its head around. Its eyes seemed to vibrate in their sockets, thick white pus leaking from the gelatinous milky scleras. It silently bared its teeth at me, its mouth filled with sharp, ebony darkness. And I took a step back, feeling my throat tighten, and I gripped the belt harder in my hand. I needed to get it away from Heather. My heart was seizing in my chest and my back was coated in a cold layer of sweat. I forced my knees to lock and I licked my dry lips. The tall dog turned away from the bed and rose up on 2 legs, towering over me. And despite its appearance, it didn't move like an animal. Its balance was perfect, and its legs and muscles twisted and flowed with the confidence of a human. What do you want? I whispered, holding my ground as a trickle of sweat slid down my face. And it leaped at me. I screamed, raising my hands to protect my face as its long body crashed into mine. I fell to the floor, its sinewy flesh pressing mine to the wood. Its breath was hot on my face, and stars exploded against my vision, my head bouncing on the ground. With the energy batted out of me, I blinked back darkness and scrambled desperately, trying to get it off of me.
It pinned me where I lay, its powerful legs digging into my sides. I looked up into its hideous face, and the white ooze pouring from its eyes dripping into my hair. It leaned down and opened its mouth, its jaws parting to reveal rows and rows of black teeth. And I watched in horror as its throat began to open, folds of dark flesh parting like oil and water. And then I heard my daughter screaming from deep down inside.
Daddy, help me, please! Daddy, don't let it take me! Daddy, please!
Heather's voice was shrill with panic, and it sent waves of chilling terror through my body. No, this wasn't happening. That wasn't my daughter. It couldn't be. Please. God, no! And the tall dog snapped its jaw shut, and I shoved it off of me, a surge of energy igniting my muscles. It skidded on all fours towards the open door, and I scrambled to stand, breathing heavily.
What did you do to her?
I screamed, shaking in fear and fury.
What have you done to my daughter?
And the tall dog crouched and eyed me, sniffing the air. I waited for it to strike, waited for it to move. This creature was going to kill me. I knew that. But I was ready. I stood my ground in the dim light, trembling, accepting whatever happened next. And instead of charging me through, it turned away and sprinted down the hall. And in shock, I listened to it crash down the stairs and onto the ground floor. More footsteps followed and then faded, and I realized that it was gone, leaving me shaking in horror. And I turned to Heather, who lay motionless on the bed. I threw the belt on the floor and I went to her side, prayers flowing from my lips, tears leaking down my cheeks as I grabbed Heather and I lifted her head to rest on my lap. Her eyes were closed and her body was still. Please, God, I'm begging you, no, 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 I cried, my mind collapsing. Heather, baby, my angel, wake up. Daddy's here, please, please, sweetie, please, please wake up, please. Heather, please wake up. And I shook her, pleading, drool and mucus bubbling from my face as reality tore my exhausted brain in two. And suddenly her eyes flickered and then she opened them. And she stared at me, blinking rapidly as if she wasn't sure where she was. I let out a cry of raw relief and I hugged her tight against me, more tears pouring from my eyes. I sobbed, rocking back and forth out of the bed, clutching her to my chest. I thought that I had lost her. I thought that she had been taken from me. And then Heather began to bark. And my bloodshot eyes widened and I pulled her away to look at her face. Her eyes roamed around the room curiously and her tongue lolled from the side of her mouth, drool leaking from her lips as she sat on my lap panting. And she finally looked up at me and let out a series of yaps, all signs of humanity draining from her eyes. Heather, stop that. You stop that right now, honey, okay? You have to stop. I cried, shaking. Don't do it. It's okay. It's gone. It's gone, sweetie. You don't have to do that anymore. But she didn't stop. She jumped from my arms and began to run in circles as if she were chasing an imaginary tail. She stopped and cocked her head at me, shouting a sharp bark as if she wanted me to play with her. And I sat on the bed, watching her and gripping my face with sweaty hands. And I began to scream. Heather will never be the same. That night, I rushed her to the hospital and begged the doctors for help. And after examining her and bringing in a multitude of specialists, they informed me that she wasn't in control of her mind any longer. They told me that she would never regain it.
Something had been taken from her that couldn't be replaced or repaired. I don't know how long they ran tests on her as I desperately expended all of my options. Desperate to try anything. I couldn't imagine a life without her. I couldn't imagine a life alone from her. And I wept and I prayed until I had nothing left to offer. Nothing changed. And nothing helped. And I wondered if anyone even noticed. You see, life is an unflinching monster. It doesn't care about you. And it doesn't take your side. It simply is. And took my wife away and opened a wound in my daughter's mind. A wound I didn't even have the courage to ask my daughter if even existed. Something horrible had caught scent of that gaping wound. Something had grown hungry for it. It had entered our life and slipped into the gory cracks of my daughter's hidden, suppressed sadness. It had replaced her mind with its own and had devoured the fractured remains of a confused and hurt psyche. And I know that I have lost Heather forever to it. So now I stand here, in the darkness, over my daughter's bed. And I grip the pillow with shaking hands. Tears roll down my face and I beg God to forgive me. But whatever is laying in this bed, I know that it's not my daughter.
With the leaves finally falling, I decided to write down what happened last autumn. I know my family has demanded answers all year, and most people have created a distance when I refuse to give them. What I saw would simply not be believed. I risked them locking me up for my own good if they knew the truth. I needed to be free, to prepare for this year. I refuse to give up on the hope my son is still out there. And I hope this provides some warning to others. 2 years ago, my wife left for no reason that I could understand. She was just gone then one day, leaving our son behind. As kids do, he blamed himself. He was just 5. How could he ever accept that he'd never see her again? We pushed through in the best way that we could. And after a year, he finally seemed to be dealing with her missing in our lives. It was hard becoming a single parent, but that doesn't mean that I regret it. I love my son more than anything. I gladly picked up the extra shifts and made sacrifices for him. Last year, we planned his trick-or-treating route, unaware that he wouldn't be able to enjoy Halloween as expected. I had a rare day off on a perfect day in autumn. It wasn't too chilly, and the wind blew through the trees. Everything looked so golden. Carson played in the backyard without a care in the world. I needed to clean the massive number of leaves in the yard, so I asked him to help. He enjoyed being useful, even if he wasn't. And by the end of our chore, we'd amassed a huge pile of leaves. And what should you do with a pile of leaves? Carefully toss your son into them. He giggled until his face was red, and I tossed him a few more times to see his little body squirming with joy. He decided to see how high he could jump on his own. I watched his small legs do an awkward running jump and then take a tackle into the pile. I heard the giggles for a second, and then a sound no parent ever wants to hear. A scream for help. For some reason, the scream sounded too far away, and I stood shocked for a second, which was far too long. I dove in, my hands out looking for him. My hands, they felt nothing, and my body lurched forward. I tossed aside leaves to see the most confusing sight my brain didn't understand. There was a hole so dark and deep that I couldn't see the bottom of it. There was no way that this had been there a second before. I didn't care the reason the hole appeared.
only that my son was down there. I carefully put my legs in over the edge, calling for him and saying that I was on the way. I let myself drop down, in my brain a mess and not thinking clearly. All I wanted was to see if my son was all right. I lost track of time. The air felt hot and suffocating. I had no control over my body as I fell. When I did hit the ground, I expected it to kill me. Instead, I landed on something soft and slightly warm. To say it felt disgusting would be an understatement. I reached into my pocket for my phone to find that it wasn't there. I cursed myself for leaving it on the charge inside the house before I started to rake leaves. I took a moment to look around. The walls were made of thick tangles, fleshy vines. The vines quickly closed over the hole I dropped from, causing my only path to be forward. I didn't see any sign of my son. An odd, almost tangy smell hovered in the air. My eyes took a few minutes to get adjusted to the light as I stumbled through the uneven ground. I knew it wasn't wise, but I shouted for Carson, hoping that he would hear me. First, I needed to find him. Then I could figure out where the hell I ended up and how to get out of here. As I moved, the walls got closer until I was just barely squeezing by. The vines made my skin crawl, and I swore I felt some sort of pulse go through them when I pressed on through the narrow pathways. The path opened into two options. I stood debating on what to do. I didn't have anything to mark the way with. If I picked the wrong way, I risked never getting back here again. Which way did Carson go? I shouted his name again down each tunnel, and I waited for an answer, and then shouted again. A noise came after I paused, calling for him, and I held my breath, hoping that he would finally hear me. Instead of a familiar voice, a gurgling noise echoed down the right pathway. I strained my eyes to see what could be the cause, and something started to come into focus. A figure not entirely human, but not like any kind of animal that I've ever seen. Just as I started to take a step closer, a hand wrapped around my wrist, making me jump. What the hell? I started as I struggled to get my hand back. Something shot out from the darkness. The stranger that came out of nowhere moved faster than I could see. He caught the whip that nearly took my head off, then cut it with a very large knife. The thing in the darkness let out a screech. I didn't need any more convincing or prodding. When the man started to run down the left pathway, I was right behind him. Or at least, mostly right behind him. I struggled to move as fast as he did. I nearly twisted my ankle a few times trying to run across the lumpy ground. At least he was decent enough to let me catch up. He stood inside a larger room with at least 10 different openings to different paths. I gasped for air as he waited for me to recover. What the hell? Just in general, I said, my face just red from running so hard. I looked the stranger over. He was taller than me and well built. His eyes were a steel gray that matched his hair. A small pack was strapped to his waist, and aside from a water bottle and his knife, he was light on supplies. "Little voice," he replied in such a thick accent that it was almost hard to understand. I found someone who might be able to help, and yet we might have issues because of a language barrier. I figured he wanted me to talk lower so whatever we ran into before didn't find us. "I'm looking for my son. He's 7. Looks like me. Have you seen him?" I half whispered. The man was in the middle of turning away from me when I spoke. He paused to consider my question. At least, he seemed to understand what I was saying. And finally he shook his head, which hurt my chest. I need to find him. I don't care about anything else. Can you help me? You act like you know what's happening." He shook his head. I wasn't sure if he didn't want to talk or knew as much as I did. I heard a sound from down one of the tunnels, and the man started to jog away, and I followed him. The damp air made it hard to breathe as we moved along. I desperately wanted answers. In the back of my mind, I thought that this was all a dream. Maybe I hit my head when I jumped down the pile of leaves. But if I treated it like a dream, then I would doom myself if I really was awake. We silently moved along, and thankfully we didn't come across any more of those creatures. I started to notice scraps of fabric tied to the fleshy vines that made up the walls. This man must have marked his way. Just how long had we been here? At some point, the tunnels became so dark it was nearly impossible to see. The stranger didn't appear to have any issues. He silently made me hold the back of his shirt, so I didn't get lost, which was a bit embarrassing. We stopped at another fork in the tunnels. One pathway was marked, but for some reason, we went into the opening that didn't have a piece of clothing as a marker. I kept my eyes open for any signs of my son. I wondered if I should have just stayed in one spot, waiting for him to find me. If I did that, would one of those creatures find me first? Soon we came across something that showed just how dangerous this place was. A dim light sat on the floor of the tunnel that we had started along. A battery-powered lantern cast a weak light, alone and forgotten. I doubted that the body near it was the person who owned the lantern at some point. But there was no sign of who left it behind. The rot and wear on the body showed that he had been down here for a long time. The closer we got, the more that the smell grew. I looked away, not wanting to see the dead. My stomach turned at the sight. The man didn't stop. He walked over to start searching the body for anything useful. I was horrified, but understood why he did so. I turned my eyes back to see him pull out a small gun from the half-rotten coat. The small weapon looked like a toy, the metal a bright blue. The man removed part of the gun, and it appeared it had a spot for a USB cable or something of the sort. Did the gun light up or something like that? Why bring a toy here? Even though the gun was useless, he still put it away in his small pack. He retrieved a small knife, which was better than nothing, but he also found a notebook that had somehow avoided the rot. He was going to leave it behind, but paused. He handed the notebook to me, which I accepted, fairly confused about how this may be helpful. The cover had some sort of company symbol I didn't recognize. I felt disappointed when I opened the book to see a language that I also didn't know. It almost appeared like English, making me assume that it was written in some sort of code. A bit of writing almost looked like 2136 was at the top of the page, but if I squinted, the scratches could have been anything. I can't make sense of this. Hey, is it safe to head back to where I came from? I really need to find my son. I pressed as I dropped the book back to the ground. He stared at me with a stone-cold gaze that gave nothing away. What's your name? I'm Mark, I said as I held out my hand. Since we met in such a frantic manner, we didn't have a chance to talk. I thought that maybe getting to know him better would make him listen to my request. Ivan, he said, and started back down from where we came from. I collected the lantern. I found a scrap of fabric tied to the handle to tie to my belt loop, so I had my hands free. Are you from Russia? I questioned as we walked. Ukraine, he replied, then refused to say more. Since this was a year ago, I didn't understand the difference between the two countries. We kept our eyes out for signs of the creatures that we had encountered and for my son. This place felt endless. No matter how long we walked, it didn't seem as if we made any progress, and I started to get thirsty. And a horrible fact dawned on me. There was nothing to eat or drink down here. Couldn't a person only live for 3 days without water? If Ivan was still alive, he either had been out here for 2 days, or he knew where to get something to drink. I put the issue to the back of my mind to focus on looking for Carson. We came across a new body. As Ivan searched for something useful, my face got hot. We weren't heading back to where we came from since we hadn't seen this body yet. I thought that we were going back to look for my son, I hissed, trying to whisper. I was mostly ignored. Ivan paused to point at a patch on the dead man's jacket, as if it meant something. Same, he said, but that didn't mean anything to me. So what if both bodies were from the same group? What did that have to do with anything? My son is very young. He's all alone and scared, and I need to get to him as soon as possible. Whatever you're looking for, it can wait, I said, my tone rising. Ivan shushed me, which didn't calm my anger in the slightest. If you told me what's going on or what we're looking for, I could help. Whatever it is can't be more important than... He didn't need to warn me about my voice getting too loud. A sudden hot flash came from my shoulder, causing me to stumble backwards. I turned on my heel, nearly tripping on the uneven ground, and blood started to soak my shirt, showing that I had been cut by something. In the darkness of the tunnel, more of those creatures waited. They howled, each voice echoing down the tunnel, causing my blood to run cold. "We need to get the hell out of here!" I shouted, ready to run. For some reason, Ivan didn't get up from the body. He still looked for something in the pockets, and soon the creatures came into view. They looked like human figures made up of those fleshy vines that covered everywhere else. One of those vines snapped outwards, missing my face by a hair. I started moving while I begged Ivan to come with me. He found what he was looking for just as the horde of monsters charged forward. He stood up, the ridiculous plastic gun in hand. He didn't flinch as he pulled the trigger. A blast of light shot out, burning away the entire tunnel. And the creatures were gone in a flash of white light, leaving nothing behind. The walls of vines were nothing but a charred mass. A terrible roar echoed through the tunnels that nearly deafened my ears. And within seconds, more vines came to cover the damaged area. I stood, mouth open to shock at what I had just saw. "Body. One shot. Lucky," Ivan said, his voice as steady as ever. "But... how... what?" I didn't add much to the conversation. I just followed behind him as we started to move. He let me take some time to think over what I had just witnessed. "Where are we?" I finally asked. I didn't expect him to answer, but he did. "Stomach." The horrible thought sank in. I ended up in the belly of a beast. Not just myself, but poor Carson as well. What kind of beast? This was more like hell than the stomach of a monster. "What year?" Ivan asked. I shook my head, not understanding his question. 2022, I answered, unsure of why this was important. 2035. His reply made me stop in my tracks. He also stopped studying my expression. I didn't want to believe him, but I also didn't want to admit that I was stuck inside of a monster that appeared out of nowhere. If I hadn't seen the gun wipe out so many creatures, I wouldn't have believed him. He had gotten stuck in the same monster, but from years in the future. Not only that, but people with far more advanced technology also ended up here. And they died. I wondered why someone would have died with one shot left in such an impressive weapon. And then I realized he might have been able to avoid the monsters, but not the lack of water. I took a deep breath, gathering myself after everything I learned in such a short amount of time. Okay, I have the answers now. I just need to focus on two things: finding my son and getting us out of here. My goal stayed the same. As long as I was alive, I refused to give up on him. Ivan raised an eyebrow, giving the most amount of emotion I've ever seen from him. "Think boy is alive?" he said, but his tone wasn't cruel. "Yes, no matter what, he's alive. The moment that I start to think otherwise is when he is truly dead. Besides, from all I've seen so far, there are some good signs that he'll still be fine. There are other people here, right? If he meets one of those guys with a gun, he'll be safe. I'm sure of it." I know people would call me delusional. I still refuse to believe anything happened to my son unless I saw his body for myself. If I accepted that there was no chance for him, that's it. There would be no reason for me to keep going. "Yes. Good." Ivan appeared to be on my side. We walked for what seemed like hours. I think Ivan took breaks for my sake. He appeared to be the type of person that just kept going nonstop. We arrived where I thought that I had shown up, but everything looked the same, and I wasn't certain. We found no traces of a child that had come through here. I considered that Carson was dropped off somewhere else, that somehow the entrance I fell inside had been more than one opening. I finally needed a real break. My body refused to move for much longer unless I got some sleep. Without a working watch, we had no way of knowing how much time had passed. Ivan said that I should sleep first, and he kept watch. When he woke me, I barely felt any better. He trusted me enough to keep watch long enough for him to rest. I think that he was only asleep for an hour at most. This man was built far differently than me. As we traveled, he rarely spoke. He pointed to the scraps of fabric, using a few words to explain which knot meant that the tunnel was safe. I thought that it was impossible to keep track of the tunnels, and yet somehow he memorized so many different paths. He stopped in front of one marked opening with 2 scraps. "Very bad. Never go," he warned. My skin prickled as my mind raced, thinking about just how awful this place could get. And because he warned me meant that he thought we might be separated at some point. He led us down an unmarked tunnel for us to find another one of those creatures. Ivan went into action, and within seconds his knife hacked away at the monster's face until all of the vines had stopped moving. Thank God that he was on my side. I started to worry the rest of my life would be just following him and standing back as he took care of the threats. More hours passed without any progress, and I needed to rest again. When I woke up, I was more exhausted than before I slept. "I need something to drink. Do you have any water?" I asked. Not once had I watched him drink from his water bottle. He shook his head and even shook the bottle, showing that it was empty. I groaned as fear set in my stomach. If I didn't get something to drink soon, I would end up as one of those bodies that we found. Silently, Ivan went over to one of the walls, knife in hand. He sliced the flesh open, holding his water bottle under the wound. The small cut closed over in under a minute, but it collected enough of the clear pinkish liquid. My stomach turned from hunger and disgust. "Is that safe to drink?" I asked. He took a few moments to find the right words. "Yes, little sips, big sips, body is them." He tapped his knife against the fleshy wall. My head started to spin over what he had said. Those creatures we faced had been people at some point. If we get desperate enough to consume part of the prison we found ourselves in, we risked becoming part of it. The cut on my shoulder stung, and my throat hurt like hell. My body needed to eat and drink something soon. I still shook my head, refusing the idea. I can go without for a little bit longer. I didn't know how much longer, but I needed to put off drinking that horrible liquid for as long as possible. Ivan agreed, but he didn't dump out his water bottle. He just strapped it back to his waist, ready to go. I thought that he needed a rest, but he refused. At that moment, I didn't know what kept him so motivated. Now I think he wanted to find Carson just as much as I did. I lost track of time down there. I knew it hadn't been 3 days just yet. I was starting to lose the battle against my drinking from the walls. Ivan started to give me concerned looks over his shoulder. He kept the knife in his hand. I soon figured out that it wasn't in case we came across more monsters. He was ready to put me out of my misery if it got to that point. I considered the fact that I wasn't the first person he needed to take care of. A sound echoed against the walls, and I stopped in my tracks. My body prickled with energy again. That wasn't the voice of the creatures. It was the voice of a small cry of a child. I bolted in the direction, Ivan shouting at me to stop. His voice nearly had gotten through to me. I just kept running, even after I saw that the sounds were coming from a pathway that had been marked with 2 scraps of fabric. It wasn't the first path Ivan warned me about. There had been a few of these dangerous tunnels we passed by, and soon I started tripping over bones and half-rotten bodies. Again, I didn't care. I heard the single word that kept me going.
"Daddy!"
I didn't see Carson, but I knew his voice. A body rose from the ground, face torn and filled with vines. I kicked it as hard as I could to keep it down. The lantern I had tied to my pants hit the back of my leg so hard as I ran. I was still thankful for it. I turned it on to see better in the dark. My heart stopped when I saw the first dead end that I had come across in this place. And at the end was Carson, crying and surrounded by those monsters. I screamed at them, drawing their attention in my direction. My son wailed from fear, and I didn't blame him. My knees shook just seeing all those creatures facing towards me. A vine shot out, catching my arm, and I fought through the pain to get free, and within seconds, more of those vines came lashing at my exposed skin. I covered my face with my arms so they took most of the damage, and when the creatures paused in their tracks, I looked up enough to see my son leaning against a small hole in the wall that hadn't been there before. "Carson!" I shouted at him. His eyes met mine and hesitated, with tears streaming down his cheeks. He turned to run. My little boy disappeared into the new opening. It was a smart move, but it did hurt to see. I forced myself to charge forward, and I punched through the first creature as hard as I could. The thing went down, but two more took its place. I turned into an animal, thrashing and screaming and fighting for my life. I used the lantern as a blunt object. I swear I killed one of those monsters after banging it into their face repeatedly. Those monsters screeched back up. I wasn't going to win this fight, even if they were now a little scared of me. Move! I listened to the order just in time. Another blast of light came from down the tunnel, clearing out the remaining creatures in front of me. The entire area shook as a massive rumbling scream tore through the air. I looked up to see Ivan racing towards me. He must have searched the bodies I ignored when I ran past them to find one more shot. My heart sank when I saw more of those creatures behind him. So many were on his heels, they filled the entire tunnel. He reached me and grabbed my arm. He hauled me to my feet to drag me back to the dead end. The boy, he asked out of breath. He was here. He went into a new pathway that closed, I explained as I was dragged backward. Good. For the first time, Ivan smiled. I may have found Carson alive, but we were facing too many of those creatures. I looked over my shoulder, seeing something that I hadn't noticed before. The blast tore open a hole just large enough for us to fit inside, but it was rapidly closing, an opening that had specked sunlight coming through. Go. Live for sun. I felt his large hand on my chest, and with a push, he shoved me backward into the opening. I felt my body falling downward as I reached for him. I couldn't leave him behind like this, but I had no control over what had just happened. I tumbled out of a pile of leaves. Clean, open air filled my lungs. I scrambled back to the pile the moment that my body let me move back to look for the hole, and no matter how hard I looked, it wasn't there. I was covered in injuries and dehydrated. I didn't have much strength left, and yet I pounded my fist on the cool grass. Tears flooded my vision as I thought of Carson and Ivan alone in such a terrible place. I calmed down and went inside, and after I grabbed my cell phone, I froze, not knowing what to say. No one would believe me. Not only that, but I saw just how long I was missing. 3 minutes. The gears started to turn in my head. If I was down there for 3 days and yet it had only been 3 minutes out here, then how long was a full year? Could Carson and Ivan live that long? I put my phone back down, and after treating my wounds as best I could, I headed back outside looking for another strange hole. I must have been in shock. I stayed outside for a full day wandering, looking for something that I never found. Almost a year has passed since that day. There isn't a single moment that I don't think of those two. I reported my son missing. There was no proof that I harmed him, so the police didn't arrest me. There were a lot of questions, though. I started working out. If I'd been just stronger and faster, then maybe I could have reached Carson in time. I haven't been able to dig up any kind of details about the horrors that I encountered, but I have noticed an increase in missing pets lately. A little girl who lived on this block went missing 2 days ago. Her father said that he looked away from the yard for a moment, and everyone assumed that she had been taken by someone, but I knew better. I've used every moment for the past year to prepare for this. I know that my son is alive. I know I'm going to find another hole to be able to save him. I'm positive of this. After all, the moment that I give up on hope is when he really dies. I can't claim that I was at a low point in my life when the salesman came knocking at my door. It would be easy to say that I was desperate and emotionally vulnerable and therefore fell afoul of his dark powers. It is true that I wasn't entirely satisfied with my life. I had a decent job and a nice home, having inherited a decent amount of money after my mother passed. I missed my mom, of course, but I dealt with my grief as best as I could and moved on. And relationships were always a challenge for me. I'd had girlfriends but never married and had no children. Hell, I didn't really have any close friends. Plenty of acquaintances, though. But no one that I could trust with my inner thoughts and dreams. Still, this social isolation never truly bothered me. Since childhood, I'd always been an introvert and content to keep my own company. But it was more than that. I've always felt that I was different from other people. An entity who lived amongst humanity but wasn't truly with them. I sensed there was something within me that wasn't quite natural. And for a long time, I believed this feeling was a form of mental illness as a result of some kind of repressed childhood trauma. There was so much my mother hadn't told me about my background. And in the end, it was the salesman who told me the truth about my heritage. For better or for worse, Pandora's box had been opened, and my life was changed forever. My story spans many generations and links our mortal world with realms beyond human comprehension. But for me, it all began on one quiet Saturday afternoon, when the enigmatic salesman came to my front door. I only vaguely recall what I was doing on that fateful day, and to the best of my recollection, I was searching for holiday deals on my laptop and sipping on a cold beer while a football game blared in the background. I do remember the annoyance that I felt when I heard the loud banging on my solid oak door, loud enough to be heard over the television inside of my living room. You see, Saturday afternoon was my time, and I wasn't keen on receiving visitors, especially unexpected ones. I have a Ring doorbell installed, but the visitor chose not to use it, instead banging on my door with an unnecessary force. I shook my head in irritation as I opened the app on my phone, only to discover that I couldn't access the camera feed. And I suppose I should have been concerned by the sequence of events. But in that moment, I was more angry than anything else, particularly as the knocking continued and increased in volume. I put my laptop down, paused the game, and got up to my feet, stomping along the corridor as the knocking continued, and I shouted, "All right! God damn, I'm coming!" I was still furious as I twisted the handle and opened the door, preparing to give the unwanted visitor a piece of my mind. But all of my anger just melted away as soon as I cast my eyes upon him. It's difficult for me to explain the impact of seeing the salesman for the first time. He was not a particularly attractive or attention-grabbing individual. In fact, he took the appearance of a small and physically meek elderly man, his body stooped over, his hair white and skin wrinkled. He wore a musky-smelling tweed suit and a bow tie and propped himself up with a walking stick in one hand, whilst carrying a leather briefcase in the other. The visitor sported a disarming but somehow unnerving smile on his crusty lips, and his brown eyes were lit up with the passion and energy of a much younger man. I didn't find him threatening at first glance. Far from it. And before the salesman even spoke a word, I found myself at ease in his presence and was no longer annoyed over his intrusion upon my afternoon. I'd never met the man before, and yet he seemed very familiar to me, like he was a long-lost relative who suddenly and unexpectedly walked back into my life. I struggled to find the words to address the old man and eventually stuttered my greeting. "Hello. Can I help you?" The visitor's smile widened as he spoke in an amicable yet somehow chilling voice.
"Good afternoon, sir. It is a pleasure to meet your acquaintance."
He held out his bony hand, which I took after only a second's hesitation. I had expected his palm to be ice cold, and so was surprised by the warmth of his palm, feeling like a surge of energy had passed from his body to mine.
"My name is Mr. Black,"
he said in the way of an introduction.
"And I am a purveyor of rare books and encyclopedias. I believe my products will be of great interest to an intelligent and open-minded gentleman such as yourself. If you have the time, I would like to come inside and tell you more."
My hand was still in his as I looked into his deep brown eyes, seeing a spark of malice in them for the first time. I experienced a wave of emotions in that moment. Curiosity and wonder. but also apprehension and more than a hint of fear. I don't know how exactly, but I realized that the decision that I made in the next moment would define the rest of my life. I could tell the mystery man to leave and go back to my quiet life of ignorance. But on the other hand, I could invite him inside and hear what he had to say. And of course, I chose the latter. Sure. Come on in, I said nervously. The salesman, Mr. Black, or whoever he really was, released my hand and continued to smile as he nodded his head and walked across the threshold. I moved to one side, allowing him to pass, and watched as he slowly marched down the wood floor corridor, his walking stick clicking as he went. I meant to call out to him and tell my visitor where to go, but bizarrely it seemed like he already knew his way around my home, and as he immediately walked into the living room, leaving me to follow him inside. Now, before I continue my account, I should explain a couple of things. First of all, I knew very well that Mr. Black wasn't an encyclopedia salesman. Apart from anything else, the profession is obsolete in this modern age of online shopping and access to unlimited digital information. Secondly, I did realize that my visitor was potentially dangerous, although not in the conventional sense. He might be a con man, of course, but I sensed his interest in me, and that came from something deeper. I cautiously followed him into my living room, noting that he had already taken a seat in the far corner. He raised his hand, pointed at the couch opposite while saying,
Please, sir, take a seat.
It was as if our roles were reversed, and I was a guest in my own home. And yet, I obeyed his instructions without comment, taking a seat while I watched him lift and open his briefcase. It was only a moment later that I realized that all of the electronic devices in my room, my television, laptop, and smartphone, were all now switched off, with their screens turned to black. Even then, I didn't understand the significance of why this had occurred. I continued to watch in awe as the salesman pulled a fine, leather-backed, red book from his briefcase, holding it so carefully, as if it was his most prized possession. I was instantly drawn to the mysterious book which my visitor held in his bony hands. The cover was unremarkable, a maroon color without any motif or title that I could see. The pages were stained yellow, which gave an indication to its age, and it had the rather pleasant musky smell that you get in older books or university libraries. I'd like to claim that the cover was made from dried human skin or covered by some kind of magical ruins, but there was nothing that dramatic. The book itself looked very ordinary, and yet I couldn't help avert my eyes from it, somehow sensing that the words contained within were of great importance.
Behold, sir, the greatest encyclopedia ever written,
the salesman suddenly announced, drawing my attention back to his grinning, wrinkled face and bright eyes.
All the answers that you will ever need are contained within these pages.
I frowned, looking again at the book and noting its thickness. I reckoned it was around 500 to 600 pages in length, which hardly seemed substantial given the claims the salesman was making. So, this is what you're selling? I asked cynically. The salesman laughed jovially, shaking his head before replying.
Oh no, sir. I'm afraid not. This book is priceless and sadly not for sale.
I scowled, becoming increasingly suspicious of my enigmatic visitor. You said that you were a salesman, I snapped back.
I did,
he replied, seemingly picking up on my increasing hostility.
The truth is, I have held many positions over the years. Preacher, historian, emissary, salesman. In all cases, the common thread is storytelling.
I scoffed dismissively before replying. So what? You're here to tell me a story?
Ah, yes, sir.
He beamed with enthusiasm as he began to open the cover.
I can tell you many stories. This wonderful book is full of them.
I see, was my cynical reply. Let me ask you something, old-timer. Have you heard of Wikipedia? I was being deliberately facetious, of course, challenging the salesman's assertions that this book contained long-sought-after answers when I could literally access all of the information in the world with the mere touch of my finger. The mysterious Mr. Black looked confused for a moment, as if my question made no sense to him. But eventually he cottoned on the answer in his typical jovial manner.
No. You mean the World Wide Web? Well, sir, I'm afraid that I am something of a technophobe. But let me assure you, sir, the tales within these pages will not appear on your internet.
He paused briefly to let that sink in. I might have laughed aloud at his audacious claim, but there was a doubt in my mind. I glanced back towards my phone, laptop, and television, noting how all had switched off as soon as the salesman entered my room. This couldn't be a coincidence, and the implications brought a chill down my spine. The salesman didn't seem to notice my change in demeanor. However, he was engrossed in his precious encyclopedia, carefully and lovingly turning the pages, his eyes lighting up whilst scanning the contents. Such was the power of the words contained within.
Now, let's see. What story would be of interest to you, good sir? Perhaps the tragic saga of Emile de Roquet and her exile to the legendary Isle of Demons.
He flicked through the pages before offering another suggestion.
Or will I tell you the rules of the Shadowlands, where the damned stand in line between heaven and hell whilst they await the Almighty's judgment?
He turned another page, looking up from the book as he shot me a twisted grin and a sly wink.
But let's not beat around the bush, good sir. I know the story that you wish to hear. The story of you. Your past and your present. And of course, your future.
I snorted again, but with less confidence than before. I thought that he was still full of crap, but my doubts were creeping in on my mind. I tried to make a joke of it, but my voice was trembling when I asked my next question. You've got a chapter about me in there, huh? I asked. The salesman's smile faded somewhat, as did the spark in his eyes as his energy seemed to diminish.
Yes,
he said in a more solemn tone.
You, sir, have a very prominent role in my book.
Proceeded to read my full name and date of birth, along with cursory details of my early life and education. I raised an eyebrow of suspicion. Of course, these were details that he could have obtained through several sources, and, on the surface, the whole thing seemed like a scam. But there was more. The salesman was somehow able to confirm my death of date, which he claimed would be the 13th of July, 2066. I laughed nervously at the revelation before saying, "So, you're a fortune teller as well as a storyteller?"
Oh no,
he replied with a dry chuckle.
I cannot tell the future. I merely go by what's in the book. But it's never been wrong yet.
I took a deep breath to compose myself once I realized my body was physically shaking with anticipation. The whole situation was insane, and my logical brain told me that none of this could be true. And yet I fully trusted the mysterious salesman in that moment. I don't know whether he bewitched me with his black magic or because deep down I'd always yearned for this self-validation, but at this point, I was hanging on every word. What else does the book say about me? I demanded impatiently, but the salesman didn't answer, instead looking up from his sacred text and towards the mantelpiece on the far side of my living room. He slowly lifted his right hand and pointed towards the framed picture which took center place.
Your mother,
he asked in a sympathetic tone. I looked to the picture, seeing my mom's smiling face and sparkling eyes, and I experienced a twinge of grief as I remembered how much I missed her. Yeah, I replied with a lump in my throat. I wondered why my visitor had changed the subject and felt frustrated at his lack of answers.
She never told you about your father, did she?
I paused momentarily, confused by the question but also feeling like he'd hit a raw nerve. She did, I answered defensively. My father died shortly before I was born. The salesman shot me a sympathetic half-smile.
That's not true, though, is it? You've always known this deep down, but you couldn't bring yourself to confront your mother. Not even while she lie on her deathbed.
I swallowed deeply, tried to control the flood of emotions that I was experiencing. I believed the salesman allowed me a moment to process these feelings before he continued to talk.
You wish to know your future. But before you do, you must understand where it is that I come from.
I thought over his cryptic words for only a moment before snapping impatiently. Tell me everything. His reaction surprised me, and as the salesman frowned, his smile disappeared as his expression darkened.
I think not, sir. I come here with honest intentions. But now I see that you are not ready for the truth.
My jaw dropped in astonishment. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I stated as much angrily. No, you can't leave me hanging like this. I must know.
I will leave you with 2 names,
The salesman replied cryptically.
Charles Robinson and Fatima Abraham.
Who the hell are they? I shot back in anger and confusion.
You have the names.
Was his answer.
Seek them out and hear their stories, piece by piece. The truth shall be revealed to you. But for now, sir, I will wish you good day and good luck.
And with that, the salesman carefully stood up from his seat and slowly walked towards the door. I was literally baffled, not believing that our bizarre encounter could end like this. I had a rush of blood to my head, deciding that I could not let him leave without first obtaining the answers that I needed so badly. And in an instant, I jumped up from the couch, reaching for the elderly salesman and grabbing him firmly by the arm. No more bullshit, old-timer! I cried out furiously. You are not leaving. I want to read what's inside that damned book! I didn't expect much resistance from the elderly man, and so was astonished when he reacted violently, exerting a near superhuman strength as he pulled free from my grasp and physically shoved me to the floor. I looked up fearfully, seeing the salesman transformed into something monstrous, his eyes black and his mouth opening to reveal a gaping dark hole. He hissed at me like a cat, and when he spoke, his words were deep and almost inhuman.
Damn it, sir,
he cried in fury.
Do not test me. Lay your hands on me again, and you will live to regret it.
And I froze in terror, averting my eyes from his hideous second face. I didn't need to be told twice, remaining on the floor as the salesman left the room, his briefcase and walking stick in hand as he slowly walked towards the corridor. I heard the door slam and my heart sank, because I knew that this bizarre encounter had changed my life forever. You won't be surprised to learn that I was grasped by a frantic obsession following the salesman's visit. I tried to track him down, searching and contacting every bookstore and sales company in a 100-mile radius, all to no avail. I could not find the mysterious Mr. Black or his unidentified encyclopedia, no matter how hard I tried. And so all I had to work with was the 2 names that he provided me. It's no exaggeration to say that I spent months attempting to track down Charles Robinson and Fatima Abraham. And despite the salesman's distrust of the internet, I used this resource extensively during my long and frustrating search. Obviously, there are thousands of individuals on social media with these names, and I had no additional information, such as their ages or geographical locations. I quickly realized that it was pointless contacting random people online, and my best bet was targeting forums which specifically dealt with bizarre or supernatural occurrences. Even then, I was faced with frustrations and dead ends. But eventually, I was able to find the correct Charles and Fatima amongst the host of trolls and scammers. How could I be sure, you ask? Well, both had received their own visits from the enigmatic Mr. Black and were able to confirm details about the salesman as well as his precious encyclopedia without being prompted by me. I was therefore confident that all 3 of us had shared the same, probably supernatural, experience, having been picked out by the ghoulish salesman for whatever reason. Now, it's possible that all 3 of them were in it together and I was their mark. I did consider the possibility that it was an elaborate hoax, but for what purpose? I also did my own independent research on the two individuals, and I'm sure that they checked me out too. By all accounts, Charles and Fatima were unremarkable people who didn't stand out from the crowd. This was my first impression, at least. There was no obvious connection between the three of us. I won't reveal where I live, but can provide some details about my companions. Fatima Abraham lived in London, having been born and raised in the UK capital. His mother was English and her father an Egyptian. Fatima wasn't married and had no kids. She didn't even own a pet as far as I knew. She worked in finance and had few friends. Meanwhile, Charles Robinson hailed from the American Midwest, where he worked as a locksmith and ran his own small business. Again, he was unmarried and childless. I suppose the three of us did share some characteristics. We were all single introverts around the same age. All of us were suspicious of other people to the extent that we could be described as misanthropes. Likewise, we all had comfortable livelihoods but felt unfulfilled. But it was more than that. Fatima, Charles, and I believed there was something missing from our lives. Some dark secret which had been kept from us. We all desired to learn this secret, and this was surely why the salesman had sought us out, because he had the answers that we thought that we so desperately needed. As the three of us communicated through private messages, and it soon became apparent that Fatima and Charles had more information than I did, the salesman had left me hanging, hinting at the identity of my father and my ultimate destiny. And on the other hand, secrets were revealed to my companions that changed their lives forever. I had made the decision to share their stories here, if only because their fates are linked to my own. I will share their own words which I had received in the form of direct messages, up until the point where they broke contact. Charles's tale. I don't know what to tell you guys about my upbringing. My family weren't rich, but I was brought up right. I don't know much about my heritage. Mom and Dad were always cagey on the subject. I knew that my grandfather had changed his surname as a young man, but never knew why. And so no one ever talked about it. And I reckon there was likely a darker family secret which had been kept from me. This wasn't something that I dwelt on, however. I was a difficult kid. That would be fair to say. I remember being angry much at the time, but never truly understood why. I would frequently get into fights in school and was in no end of trouble. My parents were concerned about my behavior. It was almost like they were afraid of me. I guess I always felt the rage inside of me. And I got better at controlling it as I got older, but my inner thoughts were often consumed by violent fantasies. These feelings worried me and contributed to my anxiety, but I never talked about them or sought professional help. In fact, this is the first time that I'd share any of this. Anyway, my adult life hadn't been anything special. I'd survived, but never been happy. I just existed and played the game. I don't know why I started working as a locksmith. I'm not a people person, and I secretly hate most of my coworkers. But the idea of being able to access their homes excites me on some deep level. I was able to intrude upon their private domains and so held a secret power over them. Now, you're probably seeing a lot of red flags here, and you'd be right to do so. But still, I'd repressed these dark impulses and might well have continued to do so if it hadn't been for the salesman's visit. You guys know the score, so I won't repeat it here. When that freak came knocking at my door and started talking about encyclopedias, I was just ready to tell him to go to hell. But I held my tongue and let him inside my home. Now, I can't explain why, but you guys have been through the same experience, so y'all could understand. Somehow I felt like I could trust this stranger, and I needed to hear what he had to say. The next bit you know too, he took that damn book out of his briefcase and started reading. There were a couple of weird stories he started off on. I remember some talk of a hidden museum of the future apocalypse and a phantom bus full of ghosts and ghouls. Now, I don't recall the details none, but these stories scared the shit out of me. But he soon moved on to my own sordid family history. It all goes back to my great-great-grandfather, you see. See, his name was Ivan Robinson, and he was notorious around these parts. Between 1922 and 1930, Ivan carried out at least 11 brutal murders in the tri-state area. 11 of which he confessed to anyway, although the true number may have been much higher. Ivan was of the earliest known serial killers in the Midwest, practicing his ghastly trade with a butcher knife, cutting his victim's throat from ear to ear in savage but meticulously executed attacks. His trademark was to break into the victims' homes whilst they were out and lay in wait, launching his murderous assaults once they returned home. And guess what? Ivan was a trained locksmith, just like I did. Now see, this was how he gained access to the victims' homes, and he used this profession as a cover for traveling from town to town, scoping out his targets whilst he planned his murders. It's difficult for me to describe my emotions as I listened to these revelations. Shock, of course, and more than a little fear. But the most extraordinary part was how the salesman told the story. He wasn't just reading the words from the book. Well, he was, but it was more than that. When the salesman described the murders to me, he didn't just cover every vivid and gory detail. The words spoke seemed to hold some kind of dark power. Somehow, I was transported to the murder scenes, feeling the knife in my hand and the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I was in my ancestor's body, hiding in a strange home and waiting for them to return. I vividly recall the terror in his eyes as I revealed myself, charging them with my blade in hand. Some fought back furiously, meaning I had to stab them multiple times before they fell. Others cowered and begged for mercy. It made no difference in the end, because I slaughtered every victim without a second thought. In truth, I enjoyed reliving my ancestors' heinous crimes, from the screams of his victims to the smell of their blood. It was like the part of me which had been buried deep inside was finally released, and now I knew who I was. And as the salesman described the arrest, I was once again taken back, possessing my late relative's body as I was thrust into a tight, windowless interrogation room during the hot summer of 1930. Underwood was standing over me, his face red with fury and his shirt covered in sweat as he screamed in my face. I remembered being terrified by his overbearing and intimidating presence. It was just that Underwood was physically imposing. There was also malice in his eyes, which was truly chilling. I didn't need to imagine what my great-grandfather was feeling in that moment. I knew that he was scared. It's a crazy thing to imagine a serial killer being afraid of a mere cop. But there was darkness within Underwood that was frightening. And when my great-grandfather didn't confess, Detective Underwood beat him without mercy. Now see, the torture went on for hours, and I felt every blow my ancestor suffered. In the end, he was forced to sign a confession for the 11 murder. I experienced a great anger once I learned how my ancestor was subjugated to this treatment, even though I realized that he was in fact guilty. Ivan Robinson was executed on the 15th of September 1932. The salesman described the execution to me in great detail. And once again, I was transported back in time, finding myself strapped into the electric chair, shaking uncontrollably as they read me my last rites and pulled the lever. The electricity flowed through me, causing me excruciating pain as my body cooked from the inside out. And then it all went dark, and I was thrust back into the present, sitting on my couch as the salesman finished reading. And before he put the book carefully back in his briefcase, he made to leave. Now see, I tried to stop him, of course I did. There were still so many unanswered questions in my own head. You all know how this goes. The old man didn't look like much, but he packs a mean punch. Then he left, having turned my life upside down in the course of one afternoon. I couldn't go back to the way that things were, not after everything that I had learned. So I started doing my own research, much like the two of you. And as you can imagine, there's been a lot of writing about my late ancestor. I also came onto these paranormal forums and started asking questions about the salesman guy. That's how I got in touch with you two, obviously. I appreciate having you both to talk to about this crazy shit. I haven't spoken with my parents, and frankly, I feel betrayed by them both, because they hid the truth from me for so long. It's difficult for me to describe my emotions at this time. But what I feel more than anything else is rage. That anger and lust for violence is no longer buried deep in my psyche. Now, it's at the forefront of my consciousness. The rage has consumed me. My greatest desire is to seek vengeance on behalf of my ancestor Ivan, and I believe it's my duty to continue his legacy. The focus of my hatred has a name, and it is Underwood. The cop who caught my great-grandfather is long dead, of course, but his descendants still live in this area. In fact, his great-grandson is an attorney right here in my hometown. And I know where he lives. And I could get inside. That burning feeling within me cannot be diminished. I will have my rage. As you can imagine, both Fatima and I were left shocked and deeply disturbed by Charles's final sign-off. If we took his words at face value, we'd assume that Charlie would commit a murder in the near future. So, what did we do with this information? I suppose the correct course of action would have been to contact the police. And yet we didn't do so. When we discussed his posts, we decided the murder threat was likely a hoax or that he wouldn't go through with it. And deep down, though, I think that we both knew that this was a lie. I cannot speak for Fatima, but I didn't report the murder plot because I wanted to see what would happen. I never did hear from Charlie again, but I was able to piece together the rest of the story through court documents and news reports. On the 23rd of March of this year, a 32-year-old locksmith named Charles Robinson illegally gained access to a private residence in Kansas City. In his subsequent confession to detectives, Mr. Robinson admitted to breaking into the home with the intention of ambushing and murdering the owner, the well-known defense attorney, Caleb Underwood. The accused believed that the home would be empty at the time, but was confronted by Mr. Underwood's maid, 25-year-old Isabella Rodriguez. A struggle ensued which ended in a brutal murder, as Robinson stabbed his victim 13 times in a frenzied attack, killing her in the master bedroom. The accused expressed remorse over the murder of Miss Rodriguez, but decided to follow through on his original plan, moving the maid's corpse to the bathroom before waiting for his target to come home. The detectives investigating the case have praised the bravery of Mr. Underwood, who was able to overpower, disarm, and subdue the suspect until the police arrived. Mr. Robinson has been charged with murder and attempted murder and has been denied bail. It is noted that his distant relative, Ivan Robinson, the infamous serial killer who committed 11 murders across the states during the 1920s and was executed by the electric chair in 1932. This was the news report from the time, and I don't mind telling you the account shocked me to my very core. Charlie had played out his violent fantasies and carried on his great-grandfather's bloody legacy, but he badly botched his murder plot, slaughtering an innocent woman before getting himself caught. Charlie might well have been executed like his ancestor, but he never made it to trial. The last report I read confirmed that Charles Robinson was found dead in his cell on the morning of April 14th. The authorities claimed that he'd taken his own life, but I'm not entirely sure. In any event, one of my contacts was dead and I still didn't have the answers that I needed. I suppose I should have felt disgusted over the whole affair, but in truth I was frustrated to have hit another brick wall. Now my only hope was Fatima, and she was able to bring another piece to the puzzle. So let me tell you this young woman's story in her own details. Fatima's tale. There's not much to tell about me. Sure, I could recount my childhood in minute detail, but what would be the point of that? I will say that my parents divorced when I was young. During my adolescence, I turned my back on my father's faith. We fell out over this disagreement and haven't spoken in years. The truth is that I never had much time for religion, and during my student days I was a committed atheist, filled with a youthful arrogance and anger against the establishment. In later life, I became much more conformist, although I never considered myself a spiritual person. I suppose I have a decent relationship with my mom. We saw each other regularly and continued to visit my mother until her sudden passing from a stroke. I grieve the loss, but in all honesty, we never were that close. I had one serious boyfriend after university. We lived together for about 5 years, but gradually grew apart. I remember the day that he broke up with me, saying that I had become cold and distant. I didn't argue and I let him go. A big part of me was relieved. I used to be bothered by things like this. It concerned me that I couldn't maintain a relationship and had no close friends. I reckoned that there was something wrong with me, and I did seek professional help in my late 20s, but multiple psychiatrists couldn't provide me the answers that I needed. In the absence of meaningful human interaction, I threw myself into my career. I was always good with numbers and so pursued a line of work, taking a job as a financial analyst after college and worked my way up the corporate ladder. I worked long hours and I made good money. By any measure, my career had been a great success. But guess what, guys? I was still not satisfied. You both know that feeling all too well. To feel like a stranger in your own life. A zombie merely going through the motions and pretending to be a human being. And then the salesman came to my door. My introductions to this mysterious stranger were much the same as yours. I was highly suspicious, but I let him into my home. I guess I was still apprehensive up to this point, and he took that book out of his briefcase and started to read. And from that point onwards, I was transfixed and hanging on his every word. He told me several tales of the unexplained and paranormal, speaking of a red phone box that can communicate with the afterlife, a cursed model village which consumed its creator, and a parallel universe which has become the resting place for countless lost ships and planes. I normally don't go for such fanatical stories and conspiracies. Throughout my life, I've considered myself an educated and logical woman who has had no time for superstitions of the past. And yet the salesman's powerful words struck a chord with me, and I felt like he'd reached something deep inside of me, awakening emotions that I'd long since buried. And this was before he revealed my true identity. My connection to the past wasn't as direct as it was for Charlie. The dark tragedy in my family's history did not occur within living memory. Instead, the salesman took me back to the 17th century, where a long-forgotten ancestor on my mother's side suffered a grave injustice. My ancestor's name was Mary Claiborne, and she was a minister's wife and a young mother of 2. Mary lived in Norwich, Norfolk County, during the 1640s, and her short life was not a happy one. Her husband was a Puritan, a real fire and brimstone type who didn't believe in spraying the rod when it came to disciplining his children, or even his wife for that matter. The way the salesman vividly described the violence and abuse, it was like nothing that I'd ever experienced before. I can relate to Charlie's account because I felt the immense power of the salesman's words as he read from the encyclopedia, and somehow I was transported back in time, experiencing my ancestors' torments as they were happening to me. I'll never forget the terror of being in that isolated rural cottage, facing the cold nights under candlelight as I fought to protect the young children, son and daughter, from the uncontrollable rage of the minister. It was particularly chilling to realize that there was nobody that I could call, no one that I could turn to for help. I was on my own against the monster. But my ancestor Mary was not entirely helpless. She had powers, you see, the type of powers that I would previously dismiss as nonsense. But now I knew that magic was very real. Mary was able to do extraordinary things, communicate with animals, read people's thoughts, and make objects move without touching them. She used her powers in small ways, but was careful to hide her actions from her husband and to the wider community, knowing all too well the serious consequences if she was caught. But the minister knew something was amiss, and this only added to his fury. Once night, he came home in a blind rage, ranting about the devil's influence and the unholy corruption of his family. He charged up the stairs, his face red as he grasped hold of his wooden cane. Mary confronted her husband at the top of the staircase, but was violently shoved all the way down, as her husband made for the children's bedroom. And I was in my ancestor's body in that moment, experiencing her acute pain, fear, and anger. I channeled those emotions using my powers in an act of violent retribution. Without moving from the floor, I unleashed a surge of energy, a righteous, invisible force which threw the minister back down the stairs. This was Mary's action, but we were one in that moment. I was in control, and I felt such power. I enjoyed seeing the shock and terror in the minister's eyes as he tumbled down the stairs, savoring every crack and cry of pain before he hit the bottom, his neck breaking as he collided with the hard floor. I looked down at his dead eyes and felt no remorse, only a grim satisfaction that the monster's life was ended. But then I turned my head and I saw Mary's young children standing in the doorway. Their teary, shock-filled eyes looked upon the violent scene in disbelief. The salesman dispassionately continued his reading and continued Mary Claiborne's fate. On the 12th September of 1645, my ancestor was sentenced to death in Norwich Crown Court after being convicted of murder and witchcraft. She was to be burnt at the stake. Given what I knew about Mary's life and all that she had suffered, I was naturally outraged at the sentence passed down against her. But there was no more. Through the salesman's words, I was once again transported back in time at the day of the trial. And there I was, in Mary's body, terrified as a baying mob called out for my blood. The magistrate restored some degree of order by loudly banging his gavel, but he soon launched into a furious tirade in which he described Mary as a whore and a witch in the service of Satan, before he gleefully sentenced her to burn. I remember the pure hatred and malice in the magistrate's dark eyes as they looked upon me with utter contempt. His hateful glare chilled me to the bone and made me question who was really in league with the devil. But the final memory was, of course, the worst, as I was pulled back to the night of Mary's execution. And once again, I possessed my ancestor's physical form as I was tied tightly to the post with a pile of firewood below me. My whole body shook as I fought against my binds and cried out for mercy. But I would get none from the hateful mob of Puritans assembled before the pyre, their eyes full of self-righteous anger as they wielded pitchforks and torches and called me every vile name under the sun. A minister spoke some words before the horror began. I can't recall the exact text, but believe that he finished on the phrase, "May God have mercy on your soul," or words to that effect. And then 3 men stepped forward and set the pyre alight. I cried out, louder this time, my body sweating and eyes bulging as I watched the flames quickly spread. I felt the heat of the fire starting with the burning on my toes and feet, but soon growing more intense as the flames shot up the stake and engulfed me, melting my skin and flesh in a horrifying inferno. I know that this atrocity happened to my ancestor and not me, but in that memory I could feel her agony, and it was the most intense pain that I'd ever suffered. And before I blacked out, I saw the magistrate in the crowd watching Mary's fiery death. A twisted smile etched across his face as he took a perverse pleasure from her suffering. And this was when the salesman brought me back to the present day, and, as you probably guessed, he left my home without elaborating on why he had told me the gruesome and tragic tale. But there was one more detail that he revealed before leaving me. I thought it was irrelevant at the time, and the significance only became apparent after I heard Charlie's story. Because you see, the magistrate who sentenced Mary Claiborne was called Underwood. As you can imagine, this revelation has caused me many sleepless nights. I'll confess to having a similar experience to Charlie as I became obsessed with the words and visions the salesman had shared with me to the point where every other part of my life was neglected. I took a leave of absence from my job and I spent every waking hour pursuing the mystery. I could find no direct connection between Caleb Underwood in Kansas City and the Norfolk magistrate who burned my ancestor at the stake. I have been able to trace the lineage of the magistrate Underwood, however. His aristocratic family is a prominent one in the English society, and one of his descendants is now a UK government minister. I know this sounds crazy, particularly after what happened to Charlie, but I too have become obsessed with the desire for revenge against Underwood. I've tried to tell myself that it's madness and I need to let it go, but I can't do this. I also realize the risks are great, but I am not powerless. I see now that my ancestors' blood runs through my veins and I have inherited a great power. I've been practicing over the last number of weeks and have honed my natural-born skills, learning the ways of my ancestors as I plot my revenge. I can do this. I need to do this. For Mary. That was the last communication that I received from Fatima, and sadly, you can probably guess what happened next. I didn't need to go searching for news this time, because the story received international coverage. On the 15th of May, UK Education Minister Thomas Underwood was attacked and seriously wounded during a public appearance outside of a secondary school in South London. The assailant has been identified as 31-year-old Fatima Abraham, a finance worker from the city with no previous criminal convictions. Witnesses say that Mrs. Abraham approached the minister as he was greeting press and members of the public. She was somehow able to slip past Underwood's security team and stab him with a knife concealed under her sleeve. Mr. Underwood was wounded but not incapacitated, managing to fight off his attacker and throw her down onto the pavement. Ms. Abraham then picked up her weapon and launched a second attack despite warnings from police officers on scene. She was subsequently shot by a plainclothes detective. Officers attempted to perform CPR on the assailant, but she died at the scene. Meanwhile, Mr. Underwood was rushed to the hospital where doctors performed surgery upon a deep stab wound in his right shoulder. A government spokesman has since confirmed that the minister's injuries are not life-threatening, and he is expected to make a full recovery. The Metropolitan Police have stated that Ms. Abraham has no history of violence and no known links to any extremist or terrorist groups. Investigating officers are currently looking for a motive. And so I deleted all my messages for Fatima after reading about her botched attack. By this point, I was in a state of disbelief. The salesman had provided me with 2 names, and now they were both dead, both having attempted to murder men called Underwood. The name did not resonate with me, but as hard as I racked my brains, I couldn't remember where or when I had first heard it. I threw myself into frantic research and did find many important public and private individuals called Underwood, men and women in politics, the media, finance, and so forth. These Underwoods were seemingly unconnected and spread throughout the English-speaking world, and there were many other variations of the surname in various different languages. Still, there were no common thread that I could identify. It's no exaggeration to say that I was driven to the edge of insanity by this seemingly unsolvable mystery. I could not sleep at night, because every time I tried to close my eyes, I saw the salesman's grinning face, Charlie hanging in his jail cell, and Fatima bleeding to death on the street. I just couldn't understand why this was all happening and what the hell it had to do with me. It was during one of these sleepless nights when the salesman returned. I was lying fully clothed on my bed, staring up the dark ceiling, exhausted but unable to sleep. The clock had just turned to 3 a.m. and when I heard a familiar loud knocking on the front door. I instantly shot up from my mattress, all of my senses heightened as a surge of adrenaline shot through my veins. I practically ran to the front door, sparing no thought for my personal safety as I opened it and came face to face with the shadowy figure standing on my doorstep. His face was illuminated by my porch light, but even so, it took a moment for me to recognize him. It was the salesman, of course, the apparently paranormal entity who went by the name of Mr. Black. But he looked different from the last time that I saw him. Gone was the spark in his eyes, and his wide grin had disappeared. Instead, the poor man looked as if he'd been dragged to hell and back and was practically on the brink of death. I stood in the doorway, my jaw dropped in shock as I found myself lost for words. And in the end, it was the salesman who broke the silence, speaking to me in a deep and raspy voice.
Good evening, sir. I apologize for the late hour of my visit. May I come in?
I paused for only a second before replying enthusiastically, "Yes, of course." I made way for the elderly visitor, watching with some degree of sympathy as he struggled down the corridor whilst relying on his walking stick to keep him steady. It seemed that his physical condition had deteriorated in the months since his last visit, but my primary interest was the familiar briefcase he carried in his left hand, because I knew that it contained the knowledge that I desired most in the world. I followed him into the living room, turning on the lights as I impatiently watched the salesman struggle over to his seat. I was frustrated that he didn't open his case and pull out the encyclopedia. Instead, he seemingly stared at me with his bloodshot eyes. There was another tense pause before he spoke, and I sensed a sadness in his words when he did so.
So, you tracked down Charles and Fatima?
Was his question. I did, was my brief reply.
And you know what happened to them, don't you?
He continued. I do.
So, There is a question you want to ask me?
There is. Who the hell is Underwood? The salesman appeared deep in thought for a moment, breaking eye contact as he slowly nodded his head.
Underwood. Yes. My employer has used this name for some time.
He trailed off without offering a further explanation. But there are hundreds of Underwood, I exclaimed in angry frustration. The name comes up again and again throughout history, but there is no connection.
No connection that you can find,
The salesman corrected.
You think of these Underwoods as individuals, but in fact they are all vessels of my employer. All are one and the same, be it the magistrate, the detective, the attorney, the government minister, and of course, your father.
Those last two words hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was shocked, of course, but also filled with an excitement that I can hardly describe as the truth was finally revealed to me. My father, I repeated in astonishment. How is this possible?
Oh, it's possible.
The salesman answered solemnly. I noticed how he took little to no pleasure in revealing the information to me. In fact, he almost seemed guilty as he struggled to meet my gaze.
Your mother, no doubt, had her reasons for keeping the truth from you, yes. But my employer's blood runs through your veins. Your heritage brings great power with it, but also considerable expectations.
What do you mean? I demanded. I was quickly growing tired of the salesman's cryptic answers. I noticed how his tone darkened before he continued.
My employer has worked tirelessly throughout the centuries to shape the history of humanity. During this time, he has attempted to recruit many mortals to his cause. But the results have been disappointing. Take Mr. Robinson and Ms. Abraham as two examples. We had high hopes for both, but alas, they both came up wanting.
The hell does that mean?
Your friends were tested and they failed. My employer expects you to do much better. You are his flesh and blood, after all.
What does he want from me? The salesman shot me a half grin, and for a moment I thought that I could see some of the spark come back into his sunken eyes. He didn't answer my question. Not directly, anyway. Instead, he changed the subject and asked a question of his own.
You look unwell, sir. Have you been sleeping?
I was baffled and irritated, struggling to find the words to reply. No, of course I haven't, I shot back. He said thoughtfully as he carefully reached into his briefcase. I yearned to see the encyclopedia emerge, but instead he surprised me by pulling out what looked like a business card. I looked on in confusion as the salesman sat up from his chair and struggled across the room towards me with the card in hand.
You really should see a doctor, sir. You can't take your health for granted. Not when there's so much important work ahead of us.
And with that, he carefully placed the business card on the coffee table in front of me before heading towards the door. I looked over at him and was tempted to shout, but instead I glanced down at the card on my table. And then I understood. As the text read, Dr. Mark Underwood, MD, family physician, open to new patients. I heard my front door slam as the salesman walked out into the night. But now it no longer mattered. I knew what had to be done, and it was up to me to prepare for the grisly task to come. I didn't waste any time planning my next move. After obtaining all the information that I could on my target, I destroyed my electronic devices, donned gloves and a scarf and a baseball cap, and armed myself with a .38 revolver and stiletto dagger. Because, you see, it wasn't my intention to confront this Dr. Underwood and demand answers. My plan was to kill him. Now, those listening to this confession might be confused by this sudden and dramatic escalation in my actions. After all, I am a man with no previous criminal history or inclination towards violence. I had no reason to hate Dr. Mark Underwood or wish him harm. The salesman had informed me that a man called Underwood was my father, and I believed him. But this Dr. Underwood was the same age as me, and so couldn't possibly be my parent. None of that mattered, however. It seemed that all of these Underwoods were one and the same, vessels for a greater, unseen power. And all of the pieces were in front of me now, and I finally understood what was required of me. Charlie and Fatima had both failed in their missions. They'd both come from a place of anger, seeking revenge against those who'd wronged their ancestors. But I was going into this with a clear mind, and I felt no moral qualms about ending the vessel's existence. I would kill him and fulfill my destiny. And so I arrived at the address on the card, which was located off a busy commercial street. And I slowly walked along the pavement with my head down and my cap covering my face as I tried to avoid attention and conceal my identity from any CCTV cameras. My weapons were hidden in my jacket pockets. The gun was my primary and dagger my backup. But I wouldn't draw my revolver until the last possible moment. And so I arrived at the front entrance of the surgery, pausing as I read the motif named printed on the glass door and confirmed that I had the right address. I purposely arrived at lunchtime when the surgery would be closed and near empty. And I therefore expected the door to be locked, and so was surprised to find it left open. It all seemed a little too easy, and I'll admit to feeling a pang of apprehension in that moment. But this soon passed as I carefully pushed open the door with my gloved hand. I entered the reception area and I found it abandoned. Even the front desk was unattended, as presumably the receptionist was out for lunch. So far so good, I thought. Next, I walked behind the reception and soon found Dr. Underwood's surgery, discovering the door wide open. And I hesitated for a time as I cast my eyes upon my target, watching him as he typed on his keyboard and remained engrossed in his work. Underwood was a handsome man, neat and well turned out, but surprisingly unremarkable. There was nothing to mark him as a paranormal entity or indeed anything other than a dedicated family physician. I had serious doubts in that late moment, fearing I'd made a terrible mistake. And I stood frozen with indecision in the doorway, my hand on my butt of my gun as I desperately tried to decide what to do next. It didn't take long for the doctor to notice me. He must have sensed my presence or spotted the shadow I cast, as he called out to me without looking up from his computer screen. "I'm afraid the surgery's closed. Please come back later." I didn't answer. Instead, slowly removed the gun from my jacket pocket, and he tutted in annoyance, turning his head away from his monitor, but once he saw me, Dr. Underwood's eyes lit up with recognition, even though I'd never met him before. "Ah, it's you," he exclaimed amicably. "I was wondering when you'd turn up." He frowned when he saw the gun in my now shaking hand. "So, that's how you plan to do it?" he asked, more with curiosity than concern. "Well, sir, let's get on with it then." And with that, he surprised me by leaping from his chair and physically jumping on top of his desk. He crouched on all fours, his eyes filled with a predatory zeal as he hissed like an angry cat and showed me his concerningly sharp teeth. I was frozen in shock, reacting too slowly as I raised my gun and aimed. A split second later, the doctor-turned monster launched himself off the desk and leapt towards me with his eyes wide and fangs exposed. I screamed in terror, firing a single shot, which missed the target. Underwood hit me like a freight train, as a second later pushing me down onto the room and pinning my body to the carpet while the gun was simultaneously knocked out of my hand. He was on top of me now, saliva dripping from his fang-filled maw as he held me down firmly.
"Come on, my boy,"
he snarled in cruel mockery.
"Is that all you can muster?"
And with that, he wrapped his hands around my throat and started to squeeze. I couldn't breathe as he slowly strangled me, and I gasped for air as my eyes bulged. I must have been close to blacking out, but I was determined not to die like this. Digging deep into my reserves, I reached into my pocket and withdrew the dagger, thrusting it deep into my attacker's thigh. He cried out in pain and loosened his grip upon my throat. This gave me an opportunity, and I kicked out with all my strength, forcing Underwood off of me. He staggered as blood poured from the wound in his leg, but Underwood was far from beaten. I went for him again with the dagger, but he easily dodged the attack, punching me hard in the nose and throwing me back into the office. I pulled myself up from the floor and turned as Underwood launched a new attack. I held out the knife and he grabbed my wrist and twisted hard, forcing me to drop the blade. I barely had time to recover before he hit me again and shoved me back down to the ground. Stunned and terrified, I watched as Underwood calmly walked over to where the knife had fallen, stooping over to pick it up.
Very disappointing, he said solemnly. I expected so much more from you. My son.
That certainly struck a nerve, and I knew that it was now or never. I scanned the floor, catching sight of my silver revolver only inches from where I lay. Underwood was now advancing on me, knife in hand, as he prepared to finish the job. I darted across the floor, grabbing hold of the gun and rolling over before I lifted the weapon and aimed. Underwood was right on top of me, but this time I had the drop on him, and I squeezed the trigger, firing 1, 2, and then 3 shots. And Underwood was struck 3 times in the chest. He barely reacted at first, looking down in surprise at the blood leaking from the bullet wounds and seeping through his previously white shirt. He looked at me in his last moment, managing a half smile as he said,
"Well played, sir."
And with that, he dropped heavily to the floor and didn't get back up again. I continued to hold the smoking gun in my shaking chest, hardly believing what I had just done. And suddenly I became aware of a new figure standing in the doorway. I span around and aimed, but held my fire once I recognized a familiar face. It was the salesman, his trusty briefcase in hand, and his sunken eyes emotionless as he looked over to the dead Dr. Underwood before turning his attentions towards me.
"Congratulations, sir," he said dispassionately. "You have succeeded where so many others have failed. Now I believe it is high time that you met my employer."
I was still trying to work out what he meant when I suddenly became lightheaded, and my eyes slowly closed as the darkness took me. And I awoke in a strange and frightening place, experiencing a stifling heat as I pulled myself up from a rocky surface and adjusted my eyes to my new surroundings. Inexplicably, I had been transported to a dark and foreign realm, finding myself inside what looked like a great hall carved from rock and dimly illuminated by burning torches. I slowly and cautiously walked upon my shaking legs, scanning the hall in fearful awe whilst noticing the high ceiling above my head. The light from the wall-mounted torches allowed me to see the guards lined up on either side of the long walkway which cut down into the middle of the hall. These soldiers looked like men, although I suspected that they weren't of the mortal realm. They all wore bronze armor and helmets like those of Roman centurion, and each was armed with a long spear and round shield. The guards stood in tight formation, not moving a muscle as I sheepishly walked past them, although I noticed how their dark, menacing eyes closely followed my progress. I continued walking towards the front of the hall, which was dominated by a great throne of cold iron, and upon it sat a giant wearing black robes, bald head but with a crown of thorns placed on top of his huge skull. Again, he took the appearance of a man but must have been at least 8 feet tall and was well built to boot, with his bulging muscles visible underneath his robes. He was eating when I approached him, greedily devouring a large slab of red meat on the bone, blood pouring down his chin while he washed his meal down, taking large gulps from a substantial golden tankard filled with God knows what. He finished eating and thoughtlessly tossed the bone onto the ground. I watched as a ragged man in chains scurried across the floor and scooped up the discarded bone, while a second figure, a woman, refilled the giant's tankard without comment. Both appeared to have the statues of slaves in this hellish realm, and they soon meekly disappeared into the shadows. A fourth figure who was also present, a small man who cowered behind the throne and would not meet my eye. It was only when I got closer that I recognized the meek individual. It was the salesman, his head bowed as he maintained a tight grip on his book of red leather, the fabled encyclopedia which was the source of power and knowledge. But the salesman was obviously submissive to the giant sat upon the throne, and so I focused my attention upon him. The giant saw me approach, his cold eyes of icy blue lighting up in anticipation as he formed his still bloody lips into a cruel smile.
Here he is.
He announced in a booming voice which echoed throughout the huge hall.
Here is the man of the hour. My own flesh and blood. Come to claim his rightful place by my side.
I stood at the foot of the almighty throne, looking up in awe as I struggled to find the words to respond. Who? What are you? I sputtered nervously. The giant bellowed laughter before answering.
Come now. You are an intelligent young man, and so you can surely guess my identity. In truth, I go by many names, both in this realm and the world above. I am king here, but you may call me Father.
The last words hung in the air, and the chilling implications made me feel sick to my stomach. What in the hell had I gotten myself into? Was this the destiny that I had sought for so long? What do you want from me? I eventually asked, and the demon's sadistic grin widened before he replied.
I want you to be the man you were born to be. You will pass your first test, but there is so much work to be done. You, bring me the book.
He clicked his fingers, and the salesman sheepishly walked up to the throne, reluctantly handing over his precious encyclopedia, which his master snatched up in his huge hand. He aggressively flicked through the pages while his servant slinked back into the shadows, and then the demon who claimed to be my father started to read. And his spoken words transported me to another place in time, as I witnessed visions of my future. Firstly, I found myself standing on a podium, decorated with banners and flags, giving a victory speech to a fanatical crowd of cheering supporters. My supporters. Cult had dedicated to serve me. Next came a vast military procession down a wide city street, which I observed from a balcony high above. Thousands of black-clad troops marched in tight formation, saluting towards me as they goose-stepped upon the asphalt. They were soon followed by tanks and other military hardware, while a squadron of fighter jets flew above our heads. Then came a vision of a prison camp surrounded by barbed wire fences and guard towers. Inside of the cordon were thousands of emaciated, beaten-down prisoners, their eyes filled with fear and hunger as they pleaded for mercy that they would surely not receive. It's fair to say that I was extremely disturbed by the images filling my head. But it only got worse, as the demon's chilling words brought me to some very dark places. I saw a city engulfed by flame, a mushroom cloud towering above the ruins as millions were surely killed in a nuclear inferno. More horrific images of war and suffering followed, and I realized that I would be responsible for the future apocalypse. And eventually I abandoned the devastated Earth, looking down upon the planet's ravaged surface from orbit as I was blasted into the stratosphere. Finally, I stood within a vast, doomed biosphere, looking out upon a red, lifeless desert. Those living beside me were my most fanatical and loyal supporters. These folks were dedicated to me and my vision, and here to help me build a new world, while billions were left behind to suffer and die on the doomed home planet. And with that, I was returned to the hellish throne room, my body shaking as I looked into the ruthless blue eyes of my demonic so-called father. I was revolted and felt a fiery defiance deep in my belly, finding the courage to stand up to the monster that sat before me. "This is horrifying," I exclaimed emotionally. The demon merely shrugged his shoulders before responding.
That depends on your perspective. I consider this as the necessary march of history.
It's monstrous, and I will not have any part of it. And I instantly regretted my outburst as I expected the demon to react with fury, but instead he retained his cool composure, his horrific grin barely faltering as he spoke his words through clenched teeth.
Oh, I think you will, my child. You forget that my blood runs through your veins, and in truth, I know you better than you know yourself. I know the darkness which dwells deep inside of you. The savagery, cruelty, and lust for absolute power. Just waiting to break out.
He paused briefly just to let the ominous sentence sink in.
And there is another reason. The events that you've witnessed. The words in this book and the events of the war to come. This will happen with or without you. And you don't want to disappoint me, my son. Failure comes with a heavy price.
He clicked his fingers and two figures emerged from the shadows behind him. It was the two slaves that had served his food and drink. The man and woman. I barely looked at them before, but now I saw their terrified faces and their mad, bloodshot eyes. There was a sudden spark of recognition in my exhausted brain as I thought back to the photographs on social media accounts and news reports. The chained slaves were Fatima Abraham and Charles Robinson. They had both failed the Demon King, and they were now condemned to serve him for all eternity, trapped at the whim of his cruel sadism in this hellish realm. And I knew this would be my fate too, if I refused him. I was left speechless, looking down at the rocky ground as I couldn't bear to see the suffering of my former companions.
Well,
said the demon in a more conciliatory tone.
Now you know the truth, my boy. It is time for you to return to the mortal realm. Think carefully about what I have said, and know that I am always with you.
He clicked his fingers once again, and I was consumed by darkness. I lost consciousness, and when I awoke, I was back on my couch in my front room, back where it all began. I've had much time to think since my extraordinary experience, but I can't find any logical explanation for what I've been through. The murder of Dr. Underwood went unsolved. The police and media believe that he was killed during an attempted robbery gone wrong. There was no evidence of my involvement in the murder or any links discovered between Fatima, Charlie, and me. It was like everything had been covered up by a hidden power. The only conclusion that I have come to is that it is all genuine. It's not just what I've seen and heard. I can feel it deep in my bones. The darkness inside me is all too real, and I cannot suppress it any longer. I don't know whether the future I've seen is set in stone. Perhaps the apocalyptic war can be avoided. Maybe I can prevent it. If I make different decisions, or alternatively, the world could be doomed. And the best that I can do is save a select few who can start again. One thing's for certain, however. I have been chosen for this great task, and I have proved my worth in my Father's eyes. The future is mine to shape, and I will not fall short. I will never tell you my name, but you will come to know me very well in the coming years. Now, if you will excuse me, I have an election campaign to prepare for.